There's an old saying about the Buddha who laughs. Not the serene figure frozen in bronze meditation, but a wandering monk whose belly shook with mirth, whose laughter rang through village streets like temple bells at dawn. The Chinese called him Budai, the cloth bag monk. He carried sweets for children and wisdom for the weary, and everywhere he went, he left behind something rare and precious, the gift of joy. Tonight, as you settle into stillness, we'll travel through centuries of Buddhist teaching to meet those who discovered something profound, that enlightenment and laughter are not strangers, that joy is not frivolous, it's sacred, that the spiritual path doesn't demand grim-faced solemnity, but invites us into a lightness so profound it transforms everything. We'll hear stories from Buddhist traditions across Asia, Chinese Chan masters who burst into spontaneous laughter upon awakening, Korean Seon monks who found liberation in the sound of cicadas and broke their fans in celebration, Japanese Zen teachers who used humor to shatter illusions, Vietnamese masters who taught that life is both suffering and wonder, and Tibetan yogis known as laughing Vajras. Tonight's video offers contemplative stories inspired by Buddhist wisdom about joy, created for rest and reflection, not medical or therapeutic advice. As we journey together through these 3 hours, if you drift off into sleep, that's perfect. These stories will work their gentle magic whether you're awake or dreaming. Let your breath grow deep. Let your shoulders soften. You've carried enough today. The Laughing Buddha is waiting to show you something you've always known, but perhaps forgotten, that joy is your birthright. Laughter is medicine, and peace wears a smile. In 10th century China, during the years when the later Liang dynasty was giving way to new powers, when temple bells rang through morning mist and market squares bustled with merchants selling silk and spices, there lived a monk unlike any other. The countryside between villages was often hard, dusty roads in summer, frozen paths in winter, bandits in the forests, hunger in the fields. Yet through this difficult landscape walked a figure who seemed untouched by hardship, whose laughter preceded him like birdsong. The villagers of Mingzhou, now called Ningbo, were the first to notice him. He would appear at dawn, emerging from the pine forests that bordered their fields, a round-bellied monk in a simple grey robe that had been mended so many times it was more patch than original cloth. Over his shoulder he carried an enormous hemp sack, bulging and mysterious, its contents shifting and rustling with each step. The autumn air that morning smelled of wood smoke and ripening persimmons. Dew sparkled on spider webs stretched between fence posts. The sun was just cresting the eastern hills, painting the whitewashed walls of houses in shades of amber and gold. Children were being called to morning chores. Water needed drawing. Chickens needed feeding. The day's labor was beginning. And into this ordinary dawn walked someone extraordinary. The monk's name, they would later learn, was Kiechi, though few would ever call him that. He had been born in this very province, they said, though no one could quite remember his family or his village. Some claimed he had been a scholar once, others that he had always been, as he was now a wandering presence, appearing when needed, disappearing like morning dew. What struck people first was his face. Where other monks cultivated serene expressions, faces smooth as temple stones, Kiechi wore an enormous grin that seemed permanently etched into his features. His cheeks were round as dumplings, his eyes nearly closed with the force of his constant smile. His head was shaved, as all monks were, but somehow his baldness made him seem more approachable, more human. There was no severity in him, no judgment, no stern teaching manner. His belly was legendary, It protruded proudly, round and full, stretching the fabric of his robe. In a land where many went hungry, where even comfortable farmers sometimes felt their belts tighten in lean years, this monk's abundance seemed paradoxical. He owned nothing. He had no rice fields, no granary, no wealthy patron. Yet he looked like contentment itself had taken human form. But it was the sack that fascinated everyone, the cloth bag from which he would take his nickname. Budai. They began to call him Cloth Bag. The sack was enormous, larger than the kind laborers used for hauling grain. It was made of rough hemp, stained with travel and weather, tied at the top with a fraying rope. What could possibly be inside? The children especially wondered. It seemed to contain everything and nothing, to be both heavy and light, depending on the moment. Kiechi never stayed in temples. He slept under trees, in abandoned shrines, sometimes in barns, if farmers offered. He never begged in the formal way monks did, with solemn chants and upturned bowls. Instead, he simply appeared, smiled, and somehow food found its way to him. He seemed to live on air and joy. On that particular autumn morning, Kiechi arrived in the market square just as the vendors were setting up their stalls. Old Widow Chen was arranging her vegetables, late cabbages, winter melons, bundles of green onions still wet from washing. Master Liu was unrolling his fabric, lengths of cotton in indigo and brown. The baker had already been working for hours. The smell of sesame buns filled the air. The children spotted him first, as they always did. "It's the laughing monk," 7-year-old May shouted, abandoning the water buckets her mother had given her. Within moments, a dozen children had surrounded Kiechi, jumping up and down, reaching for his sack, calling his name, or rather, calling him by the 100 nicknames they had invented. "Happy Master, Belly Buddha, the Candy Monk." Kiechi's laughter rang out, deep and genuine, the kind of laugh that starts in the belly and erupts like thunder. He set down his sack with exaggerated ceremony, making the children wait, building their anticipation. They knew what was coming. They had seen it before, but the magic never diminished. From the depths of that impossible bag, Kiechi began to pull treasures. For little May, whose family could rarely afford sweets, he produced a small packet of candied ginger wrapped in rice paper. Her eyes went wide, for the blacksmith's son, who loved anything that clicked or clacked. He found a handful of smooth pebbles that rang like bells when shaken together. For the shy girl who stood at the back, too timid to push forward, he somehow had a length of red ribbon just enough to tie back her hair. One by one, each child received something. Not always what they expected. Not always even what they thought they wanted. But always, somehow, exactly what they needed in that moment. The adults watched this daily miracle with mixed feelings. Widow Chen smiled, remembering when her own children had crowded around visiting monks. Master Liu frowned slightly. Generosity was good, but didn't it teach children to expect things for free? The baker simply shook his head in wonder. Where did it all come from? The monk owned nothing, possessed nothing, yet his bag never emptied. "Master Kiechi," a voice called out. It was Scholar Wang, a man who prided himself on his learning, who could recite Buddhist sutras from memory, who maintained a small shrine in his home and made sure everyone knew about his devotion. He approached the monk with his hands folded formally. "I notice you give much away. But what do you teach? What wisdom do you offer?" The market grew quieter. This was the question many had wondered but never voiced. Buddhism was about teachings, wasn't it? About learning the Dharma, understanding the sutras, following the precepts. This monk just laughed and handed out gifts. Where was the serious practice? Where was the discipline? Kiechi looked at Scholar Wang for a long moment. His smile didn't fade, but something shifted in his eyes, a depth that hadn't been visible before. He reached into his sack and pulled out a small persimmon, perfectly ripe, still warm from the sun. He held it out to Scholar Wang. The scholar hesitated. Was this a test? Some Zen puzzle he was supposed to solve? He had heard of such things, masters who taught through paradox, through impossible questions. "Take it," Kiechi said simply. His voice was surprisingly gentle, unhurried. Scholar Wang took the persimmon. It sat in his palm, orange and soft, ordinary and perfect. "Now," Kiechi said, his grin returning, "are you happier than you were a moment ago?" The scholar opened his mouth to reply, "Of course not. It was just a persimmon." He had a whole tree of them at home, but something stopped him. He realized he was, in fact, smiling. The fruit was warm. The morning was beautiful. A child nearby was laughing. And in this moment, receiving this simple gift, something in his chest had loosened, just a fraction. He had no words for it. Kiechi's laughter boomed again. "There, that is the teaching." Word of the exchange spread through the village faster than smoke rises. By noon, everyone had heard about Scholar Wang and the persimmon. By evening, people were arguing about what it meant. "He's not a proper monk at all," said Master Liu to his wife as they ate dinner. "He has no teacher, follows no rules, spends his time entertaining children like a marketplace performer." But his wife, quieter and more observant, had noticed something. "Did you see old grandmother Zhao this morning? The one who hasn't smiled since her husband died 3 years ago? She was laughing." The laughing monk told her some silly joke about a duck, and she was actually laughing. Over the following weeks, Kiechi remained in the area, drifting from village to village but always returning to Mingzhou. His pattern became familiar. Dawn would find him on the roads. Mid-morning in the market squares. Afternoons he would sit under the old oak tree by the well, his bag beside him, open to anyone who approached. People began to notice patterns. Farmer Zhang, perpetually anxious about his harvest, his debts, his son's futures, would sit with Kiechi and somehow leave walking lighter, as if he'd set down an invisible burden. The monk never gave advice. He just listened, nodded, occasionally offered food from his bag, a peach, a handful of nuts, and somehow the farmer's fears seemed less overwhelming. Young Mother Lin, exhausted from nursing an infant who never slept, found Kiechi sitting outside her door one morning. He didn't offer to teach her anything about parenting. He simply sat there while she poured out her frustration, her fear that she was failing, her bone-deep tiredness. When she finished, he had pulled from his bag a small cloth, soft, clean, exactly the right size for a baby blanket. "Rest is sacred," he said. "When the baby sleeps, you sleep. Nothing else matters." It seemed simple, but she cried in relief because someone had given her permission. The village teacher, Master Veen, prided himself on discipline. His students learned through repetition, through strictness, through fear of making mistakes. He saw Kiechi playing games with children in the square, teaching them the names of birds through silly songs, showing them how to skip stones across the pond and he approached with criticism ready on his tongue. "You're teaching them to be frivolous," he said. Kietzi looked at him with those crinkled eyes. "Am I? Watch." The next day, Master Wen watched. He saw a child who struggled with characters remember a difficult symbol because Kietzi had compared it to a dancing crane. He saw another child, usually too frightened to speak in class, confidently showing others how to count using a game the monk had invented. He saw learning happening through joy rather than fear. Master Wen said nothing, but the next week, his students noticed his lessons had changed. There was laughter now, where before there had only been silence and recitation. As the season shifted toward winter, something remarkable happened. Scholar Wang, the man who had questioned Kietzi's teachings, began to change. He stopped making elaborate offerings at his home shrine and instead spent time with his elderly mother, whom he'd neglected. He stopped reciting sutras to impress neighbors and started simply sitting with people who were lonely. One day he found Kietzi by the well. "I understand now," Scholar Wang said. "You weren't teaching me about happiness that day. You were teaching me that I already knew how to be happy. I'd just forgotten." Kietzi pulled out a rice ball from his bag, took a large bite, chewed contentedly. "Did I teach you that?" he said through the food, in a way no proper monk would ever speak. "Or did you teach yourself by paying attention?" As winter approached, the monk prepared to move on. His presence had always been temporary, like sunlight on water. The villagers gathered at the edge of town to see him off. Many brought gifts, food for his journey, warmer clothing, small tokens of gratitude. Kietzi accepted it all with his usual grin, stuffing everything into his magical bag. But then he did something unexpected. He began to empty the bag again, redistributing everything. The rice cakes went to the elderly widow who'd given them, because her winter stores were low. The thick socks returned to the farmer who'd offered them, because his feet were more worn than Kietzi's. "It all goes where it's needed," he said simply. The last person he approached was a young man, barely 18, who had been watching from the back of the crowd with sad eyes. Everyone knew his story: parents dead, crops failed, future uncertain. Kietzi reached deep into his bag and pulled out nothing. Literally nothing. He held out his empty hands to the young man. "This is what I'm giving you," Kietzi said. The young man stared at the empty palms, confused, hurt even. Everyone else had received something. "Look closely," Kietzi said gently. "I'm giving you freedom. Nothing to carry. Nothing to lose. Nothing to protect. Just this moment, and the road ahead, and the certainty that whatever you need will appear when you need it." The young man's eyes filled with tears. Somehow, this made perfect sense. The weight of his grief, his fear about the future, his shame about his poverty, it all suddenly seemed like things he could set down. "Travel light," Kietzi said, and his laughter rang out one more time across the village square. That was the last time anyone in Mingzhou saw the monk called Budai. He walked down the dust road toward the next town, his bag over his shoulder, his laughter fading into the distance. But his influence remained. Widow Chen kept a small cloth bag by her vegetable stall. When children came to the market, she would give them each a small piece of fruit, saying, "This is from the laughing monk's teaching." The tradition continued for generations. Scholar Wang never became famous for his learning. Instead, he became known as the man who helped others without making a show of it, who listened more than he spoke, whose home was always open. When people thanked him, He would smile and say, "I learned from a monk who taught me that wisdom looks like generosity, and generosity looks like joy." Years later, on his deathbed, Kichi was said to have written a poem. Some say it was actually found, inscribed on the wall of a small shrine. Others say it was whispered by those who knew him. The poem revealed what many had suspected, that he was no ordinary monk, but an incarnation of Maitreya, the future Buddha, who had walked among ordinary people to remind them of something essential. But the poem itself mattered less than what he'd lived. He had shown thousands of people, in hundreds of villages, that enlightenment wasn't found in perfect meditation or flawless adherence to rules. It was found in a smile given freely, in a gift offered without expectation, in the willingness to carry a heavy bag so that others might carry less, in the revolutionary act of being genuinely happy in a world that offered so many reasons for sorrow. The laughing Buddha became a beloved figure across China, then Korea, Vietnam, Japan. His statues appeared in temples, homes, marketplaces. People would rub his belly for good luck, and he wouldn't have minded. He would have laughed at the gesture, delighted by the simple human hope it represented. He had lived his teaching. That joy isn't the destination of a spiritual path, but the path itself. And now, as you rest here in the quiet dark, perhaps there's something to notice about this strange monk and his bottomless bag. Chi understood what many of us forget in our busy, worried lives, that the heaviness we carry isn't always necessary. We stuff our days full obligations, worries, plans, should-haves, and must-dos. We carry bags of our own, invisible but so heavy. The bag of past regrets, the bag of future anxieties, the bag of all the ways we believe we're not enough. And here comes this monk, grinning like he knows the best secret in the world, carrying an actual heavy bag but somehow light as air. His bag was full of things for others. His hands were open. His heart was spacious enough to hold everyone he met without becoming cluttered. What if lightness isn't about having less, but about carrying differently, about carrying what's meant for giving rather than grasping? Think about your own life right now, even as your body sinks into rest. What are you carrying that you could set down, even just for tonight? The mistake you made last Tuesday that you keep replaying, the conversation you wish you'd handled better, the fear about whether you're doing enough, being enough, becoming enough. Kiechi would have looked at all of it and laughed, not cruelly, but with the recognition that we make ourselves so serious about things that won't matter in 10 years, 10 months, sometimes 10 minutes. He would have reached into his bag and handed you something surprising. Not necessarily what you thought you needed, maybe not even what you wanted, but exactly what would help you remember that this moment, this very moment, right now, already contains everything required for your peace. Feel your breath moving in and out. In this moment, are you breathing? Then you have what you need right now. Feel the softness beneath you. In this moment, are you safe and held? Then you have what you need right now. This is what the monk understood. Not that life doesn't have real difficulties. He lived in hard times, walked difficult roads, saw suffering everywhere. But that happiness isn't waiting at the end of fixing everything. It's available now, in the gap between thoughts, in the warmth of a persimmon in your palm, in the surprise of an unexpected kindness. Consider Scholar Wang, so proud of his spiritual knowledge, his correct practices, his proper shrine. He knew everything about Buddhism except how to be happy. One simple fruit handed to him with genuine care, and something shifted. not his circumstances, not his knowledge, just his willingness to receive a moment exactly as it was warm. Simple. Enough. How many moments of simple goodness have you rushed past today? This week? This month? The morning light through your window? Someone who held a door open? The smell of coffee or tea? A bird singing its absurd little song? These aren't trivial things. These are Kiechi's gifts from the bottomless bag, evidence that the universe keeps offering us ordinary joy, if we just stop long enough to receive it. And what about the young man who received nothing, those empty hands? At first it seemed cruel, but Kiechi knew something profound. Sometimes the greatest gift is the removal of the burden of wanting, of needing, of feeling like we're falling behind in some race we didn't sign up for. Freedom comes from traveling light, from trusting that each day brings what's needed for that day. No more, no less. This doesn't mean passivity. Kiechi walked miles every day. He worked, in his way, entertaining children, comforting the grieving, challenging the overly serious. But he worked without strain, without the grasping quality that makes even good work feel burdensome. He gave everything away and somehow always had enough. He carried everything and carried nothing. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Feel how much effort you're putting into being somewhere other than here. Someone other than who you are right now. What if you set it down? Just for tonight. Just for this breath. The Laughing Buddha teaches that spiritual practice doesn't have to be grim. That enlightenment might look less like achieving something and more like remembering something, the way children know how to laugh without reason. The way a dog greets you with full-body joy just because you exist. The way the sky is blue, whether you notice it or not. You are allowed to be happy now. Not when everything is perfect. Not when you've earned it. Now, as you are, with everything unfinished and uncertain. This permission isn't something you have to seek from anyone. It's already yours. Feel the blanket's weight. Notice the darkness behind your closed eyes. Here, in this moment, you have everything you need. And that's enough. That's everything. Rest now, in the teaching of empty hands and a full heart. Let your breath carry you deeper now. Breathe in the cool night air. Breathe out the day's accumulation of small tensions. And as that heaviness settles, imagine yourself walking down a dusty road. You're not carrying anything, no bags, no burdens. Your hands are empty and light. And just ahead, you hear laughter echoing from the next village. Someone laughing like they've discovered the universe's best joke. You walk toward that sound, curious now, open to whatever small gift this day might offer. We turn now to another tradition, another landscape. From the merchant towns of China, we travel to the wild mountains of Tibet, where snow falls on ancient monasteries and a different kind of laughter echoes against the rocks, the fierce joy of a man who turned from darkness into blazing light. In 11th century Tibet, where the Himalayas pierce clouds like prayers ascending, where monasteries clung to mountainsides like swallows' nests, and where winter cold could kill as quickly as summer storms, there lived a man whose very name meant joy to hear. Born as Mila Thopaga, delightful to hear, he would one day be called Shepa Dorje, the laughing Vajra, though the road to laughter would first lead through darkness so complete that many would have been swallowed by it forever. The village of Gungtang sat in a high valley where barley grew in terraced fields and yaks grazed on slopes too steep for anything else. Prayer flags snapped in winds that never fully stopped. The air was thin and clear as crystal. every star visible on cloudless nights, every sound carrying for miles. Mila's childhood home had been prosperous once. His father, Sherap Gyaltsen, owned fields and herds, a house with 2 stories, respect in the community. His mother, Nyangcha Kargien, wore coral necklaces and turquoise rings. His little sister, Peita Paldron, played with dolls carved from juniper wood. Life was good, ordinary, safe. Then his father fell ill. The sickness came in autumn, and by spring's first thaw, he was gone. Mila was 7 years old. What happened next was a story as old as human cruelty. His father's brother, Uncle Yungi, and Aunt Genjen were appointed to manage the estate until Mila came of age. Within months, they had moved into the main house, claiming the best rooms. They gave Mila's family a single cold room at the back. Within a year, Mila, his mother, and his sister were working their own fields as servants. They hauled water in winter until their hands cracked and bled. They harvested barley they weren't allowed to eat. They mended fences for animals they no longer owned. His mother's coral necklaces disappeared, sold or stolen. His sister's dolls were burned as kindling. The neighbors watched and did nothing, afraid or indifferent. Mila grew up bent under loads too heavy for his young back, growing tall but thin as a reed. His childhood stolen like everything else his family had lost. His mother's heart turned hard as mountain stone. She nursed her bitterness like a flame that never went out, feeding it with memories of injustice, keeping it burning through every humiliation. Someday, she would whisper to Mila in the dark, "You will make them pay. Someday, you will have the power to hurt them the way they've hurt us." Mila was 18 when she sent him away to learn black magic. Not Buddhist Dharma, not healing arts. Magic for revenge, for destruction, for payment of debts written in suffering. He found a teacher, Yungten of Ngak, called the great and terrifying magician of evil spells. For a year, Mila learned to bend invisible forces to his will, to whisper into the ears of spirits, to craft spells that could crack stone and break bones. Another teacher taught him more, darker things, until Mila's power was undeniable. The day came. His cousin was getting married, the son of the uncle who had stolen everything. The whole village was invited to celebrate. Mila wasn't there. He was in a cave 3 valleys away, sitting before an altar piled with bloody offerings, chanting words that made the air taste like copper and smoke. The wedding feast was at its height when the earth began to shake. At first, the guests laughed nervously, steadying their cups. Then the shaking intensified. The courtyard of Mila's childhood home, now his uncle's house, filled suddenly with writhing serpents. Spiders the size of fists, lizards that seemed to materialize from shadows. The horses in the stable went mad with terror, kicking through their stalls. And then the house itself began to fall. The main supporting beam cracked with a sound like thunder. The roof collapsed inward. 37 people died in the chaos, crushed by falling timbers, trampled in the panic, struck by falling stones, including his cousin, including his uncle, including his aunt. Mila sat in his cave 3 valleys away and felt the spirits he'd summoned bring him the bloody hearts and severed heads of those he'd killed. They piled them on his altar like offerings. He looked at them and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no joy. Just a hollow emptiness and a creeping, nauseating horror at what he'd done. His mother was pleased. At first, Finally, she said, "Justice." But when she looked at her son's face, at the way his eyes had gone dead and distant, she grew frightened. Mila couldn't sleep. When he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the people he'd killed. Not just his uncle and aunt, whom he'd hated, but the other guests, young people, someone's grandmother, a child who'd been playing near the wall when it collapsed. He had murdered them as surely as if he'd crushed their skulls with his own hands. 37 human lives, snuffed out to satisfy his mother's rage and his own wounded pride. The remorse came like a fever. He burned with it. He wept until he had no tears left. He tried to eat and couldn't. He tried to pray to the spirits he'd commanded, and they wouldn't answer. Perhaps they were disgusted by him too. Or perhaps they simply had no comfort to offer. "I have created karma so heavy," he whispered to his magic teacher, "that I will suffer in hell for thousands of lifetimes. Is there any way to purify this? Any dharma strong enough to cleanse what I've done?" Even Jungten, who had taught him the darkest arts, felt pity. "There's a teacher," he said quietly. "A translator named Marpa, who has just returned from India with teachings more powerful than any magic. If anyone can help you, it's him. Go, find him, and may whatever gods still listen have mercy on you." Mila was 38 years old when he finally found Marpa's house in Lodrak, in southern Tibet. He'd spent weeks traveling, sleeping in caves and abandoned shrines, eating almost nothing, driven by a desperation so complete it was almost a form of prayer. He arrived at midday. Marpa was plowing a field, which was unusual. Most great teachers didn't do such work. He was a stocky man, middle-aged, with a face that looked like it laughed easily, but could also harden to stone when needed. He glanced up as Mila approached, then went back to his plowing. "Teacher," Mila called out, "I seek the Dharma. I have done terrible things and I need to purify them." Marpa didn't stop plowing. "Go inside. There's beer and food. Help yourself. Then we'll talk." Mila obeyed, confused. Was this really the great master? He seemed so ordinary, so casual. Inside the house, he found the promised beer and some barley bread. He ate hungrily. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd eaten properly. When Marpa came in from the field, his face had changed. The casual farmer was gone. In his place stood someone whose gaze seemed to see straight through Mila's skin into the rotting core of his guilt and shame. "You have blood on your hands," Marpa said quietly. It wasn't a question. Mila's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead to the floor. 37 people. I killed 37 people with black magic. I destroyed crops. I caused suffering beyond measure. I will do anything to purify this karma. Please, teach me. Marpa was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You want me to teach you? First, you're going to build me a house. A tower, 9 stories high. On that mountain ridge," he pointed to a nearby slope, "you'll work alone. You'll carry every stone. And when you're finished, if I'm satisfied, then maybe I'll consider teaching you." Over the next 6 years, Mila built towers. Not just one, many. Each time he finished, Marpa would inspect the work, find some flaw, and order him to tear it down and start over. "The foundation is in the wrong place. The walls aren't straight enough. I've changed my mind about the design. Mila's back was covered with permanent scars from carrying stones. His hands were masses of calluses and healed wounds. Other students arrived, and Marpa taught them immediately, lovingly. But for Mila, there were only more stones to carry, more walls to build and tear down, more crushing labor. He wept in the darkness. He raged. He despaired. Several times, he nearly gave up and left. But something kept him there, perhaps the knowledge that he had nowhere else to go, or perhaps the faint hope that this suffering was itself purification, payment for the suffering he'd caused. Finally, after 6 years, when Mila had built and destroyed enough towers to fill a valley, Marpa called him inside. The other students were there. Marpa's wife, Dahmema, was weeping openly. "Mila Töpaga," Marpa said, and his voice was different now, warm, tender, full of love. "Do you understand what you've been doing?" Mila shook his head. He understood nothing except exhaustion and pain. "Every stone you carried was a life you took. Every tower you destroyed was your pride, your anger, your attachment to being right. You came to me with 37 deaths on your hands and enough negative karma to drag you through hell realms for eons. You needed purification beyond any ordinary meditation. So I gave you work that would break your body and shatter your ego, that would force you to surrender every last shred of the man who thought magic could solve problems." Marpa reached out and put his hand on Mila's head. The touch was gentle, fatherly. "And you did it. You survived. The purification is complete. Now, finally, I can teach you." That night, Marpa gave Mila his first initiation into the practice of chakra samvara. During the ceremony, Marpa gave him a new name, Shipa Doria, the laughing Vajra. "Laughing?" Mila asked, confused. He hadn't laughed in years. He'd forgotten how. "You will," Marpa said, and for the first time, Mila saw his teacher smile. When you truly understand what you've learned, laughter is the only possible response. After that, Mila trained in earnest. He learned meditation techniques from the Indian Mahasiddhas, transmitted through Marpa. He learned to work with the subtle body, the channels and winds and drops that Tibetan yoga manipulates. He learned Mahamudra, the Great Seal, the direct recognition of mind's nature. And mostly, he learned to sit in caves, alone with himself. No magic to wield, no towers to build, nothing to do but face his own mind. He spent 12 years in retreat, sometimes in caves so remote that no human passed by for months. Sometimes in places so cold that he wore only a single cotton robe and had to generate inner heat to survive, earning him the name Milarepa, the cotton-clad one. And in those caves, something extraordinary happened. The man who had killed out of rage, who had carried stones in desperation, who had known only suffering and guilt, that man disappeared. Not through escape, but through transformation so complete it was almost alchemical. He began to sing. The songs came spontaneously, erupting from someplace deeper than thought. They poured out of him in verses that made the Tibetan language dance, that took profound Dharma teachings and made them into poetry, that somehow held both the weight of his suffering and the lightness of complete release from it. And when he sang, he laughed. A deep belly laugh that echoed off cave walls. People who heard him described it as the sound of someone who'd gotten the ultimate cosmic joke, not a mean joke, not laughing at others, but the kind of laughter that comes from suddenly understanding that everything you'd taken so seriously was absurd, that all your grasping and aversion and fear were like children fighting over sand castles that the tide would wash away. He came down from the caves and people were drawn to him immediately, not because he was serene or solemn or perfectly composed like they imagined enlightened masters should be, but because he was radiant with an almost terrifying joy. Students came. He didn't lecture. He sang to them. He sang about seeing his mind like the sky, vast and untouched by whatever clouds passed through it. He sang about recognizing the suffering caused by grasping at things that couldn't be held. He sang about the brilliant clarity that arises when you finally stop trying to be anything other than exactly what you are. One day, a scholar named Rechungpa came to him. Rechungpa was young, brilliant, full of philosophical knowledge. He'd memorized entire Buddhist texts. He could debate subtle points of doctrine for hours. But he was miserable, tormented by his own perfectionism, never satisfied with his understanding. "Teach me the highest teaching," Rechungpa demanded. "I've studied for years. I'm ready." "Milarepa, Shepadorye." The laughing Vajra looked at him and burst out laughing. Rechungpa was offended. "Why are you laughing? I've come here seriously seeking the Dharma. I'm laughing," Milarepa said, still chuckling, "because you're asking me to give you something you already have. You're like a fish asking me where to find water. You're swimming in it. You're made of it. But you're so busy looking for water that you can't feel the wetness." "I don't understand," Rechungpa said stiffly. "I know," Milarepa said kindly. "That's what makes it funny." He paused, then sung, "The mind is like the sky, unborn and free, yet you search for it in books and philosophy. The nature you seek lives in your very seeing, but you're too busy seeking to notice your being. Relax, young scholar. Stop trying so hard. The Dharma isn't something to figure out and regard. It's the sound of the wind, the space between thoughts. It's already yours, it can't be bought. So laugh with me now at this cosmic jest. The treasure you seek is inside your own chest. And all of your striving and searching and pain is like running in circles to catch your own brain." Rechungpa didn't get the joke. Not then. But he stayed with Milarepa, and over time, something in him began to soften. The scholar's rigidity melted, and one day, months later, he was sitting in meditation when it hit him the absurdity of it all, the beautiful joke of existence. And he laughed so hard, he fell over. Milarepa, in the next room, heard him and started laughing too. They sat there laughing together, for no reason and every reason. Another time, a group of monks came from a wealthy monastery. They were well-fed, comfortable, respected. They'd heard of Milarepa and came partly out of curiosity and partly to test him. After all, he lived in caves, owned nothing, Vorlags. How could he be a real master? They found him sitting outside a cave, eating nettle soup. He'd been eating almost nothing but nettles for so long that his skin had a greenish tint. He looked half-starved, wild, more like a ghost than a man. "You call yourself enlightened," one monk said with barely concealed contempt. "But look at you. You're dying. You have nothing." "What kind of teaching is that?" Milarepa smiled that radiant, impossible smile. Then he began to sing again. "You see my body thin as a stick. You think I'm dying. You think I'm sick. But let me tell you what I've found. In these high mountains, on this sacred ground, I've eaten food you'll never taste. I've drunk the wine of uncontrived grace. I'm fat with freedom, rich with space. The whole sky is my dwelling place. You sleep on cushions, eat fine rice, live in comfort, think it's nice. But you're imprisoned by your wealth, chained by status, robbed of health. So which of us is really poor? You, with your treasures, or me with more than any storehouse could contain? The joy of freedom. Released from pain, the monks didn't know what to say. Some left angry, but a few stayed, sitting outside his cave, trying to understand how someone with literally nothing could seem so completely, radiantly happy. The secret, if there was one, was that Milarepa had learned something profound through his journey from darkness to light. That happiness doesn't come from getting what you want or becoming who you think you should be. It comes from the complete, unconditional acceptance of what is, exactly as it is. And once you truly accept it, not with resignation but with recognition, it becomes hilarious. All the striving, all the suffering, all the serious self-importance falls away, and what's left is as light as sunlight on snow. Years passed. Milarepa wandered from cave to cave, singing and teaching, his laughter echoing across glaciers and valleys. People called him Jetson Precious, Reverend One. But he called himself just a yogi, just a cotton-clad wanderer who discovered that the nature of mind is like space itself, clear, open, and spontaneously joyful. Near the end of his life, his main disciple Gampopa came to him. Gampopa had been a monk, a doctor, serious and scholarly like Richungpa had been. He'd studied with Milarepa for years, meditating in caves, following instructions carefully. But he still hadn't quite gotten it. "Teacher," Gampopa said, "I'm leaving tomorrow to begin teaching others. Is there any final instruction you can give me?" Milarepa looked at him with those clear, laughing eyes. "Yes," he said. "One more teaching, the most important one." Gampopa leaned forward eagerly, ready to receive some profound secret. Milarepa stood up, turned around, and lifted his cotton robe, exposing his buttocks. They were covered with calluses from years of sitting on stone. But more than that, they were the buttocks of someone who'd worked until his body was nothing but bone and determination, who'd suffered beyond measure and transformed it into light. "This," Milarepa said, his voice full of laughter, "this is the teaching. Work until your ass is as hard as mine. Then you'll understand everything." Gampopa started laughing. Not polite laughter. Deep, belly laughter that brought tears to his eyes. Because suddenly he got it. The teaching wasn't in words or concepts. It was in the willingness to fully commit, to endure, to give everything, and to do it all without taking yourself so seriously that you forget to laugh. Milarepa, the man who'd murdered 37 people, who'd built and destroyed towers until his back was ruined, who'd sat in caves eating nettles until his skin turned green, who'd suffered more than most people could imagine, he was laughing. He'd turned his darkest karma into the brightest realization, and the sound of his laughter was the Dharma itself, pure and clear as temple bells. When he died, they found a note he'd left. Some say it was written on the cave wall. Others say it was sung to his students. The note said that he was Maitreya, not the historical figure, but an embodiment of future compassion. The laughing Buddha who would remind people that enlightenment and joy were inseparable. But even that teaching was offered with a wink, with humor, because to take even your own enlightenment too seriously was to miss the point entirely. The point was to laugh. to sing, to recognize that your true nature was as bright and unobstructed as the sky on a clear morning. And once you saw that, how could you not laugh? The laughing Vajra had shown the way not through grim determination alone, but through the willingness to transform even murder into medicine, even suffering into song, even the darkest night into a dawn that broke over the mountains with light so bright it made everything clear, beautiful, and absurdly, perfectly funny. Perhaps you notice something now, here in the darkness of your own night. Milarepa's laughter echoes across centuries, reaching even here, to this moment. His story teaches that no karma is too heavy to purify, no darkness too deep to transform. He started as a murderer, literally the worst thing you can be, and became one of the most beloved teachers in Tibetan history. Not because he avoided his guilt or justified his actions, but because he walked directly into the fire of his remorse and let it burn away everything false until only truth remained. How often do you carry your own towers of guilt, the things you regret, the people you've hurt, the versions of yourself you're ashamed of? Milarepa would look at all that weight you're carrying and laugh not cruelly, but with recognition. He'd say, "Yes, that's heavy. Now put it down. Carry the stones until your back breaks, if that's what it takes to finally surrender. But know that on the other side of that breaking, there's freedom lighter than you can imagine." Notice your breath right now. Feel it moving in and out without your effort. This breath, this simple, ordinary breath, is happening in the same awareness that Milarepa woke up to in his caves. The same sky-like nature that he recognized and celebrated in his songs. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to build towers to deserve it. It's already here, already yours, already singing its song even when you can't hear it. And the laughter? That comes when you finally stop taking your story so seriously. Not because your story doesn't matter, Milarepa's mattered immensely, but because beneath the story, beneath the guilt and pride and fear and hope, there's something untouched by all of it. Call it Buddha nature. Call it the unborn mind. Call it whatever you want. Milarepa called it cause for celebration, cause for song, cause for laughter that echoed off cave walls and still echoes now. What if you could laugh at your own seriousness the way Milarepa did, not to diminish your struggles, but to recognize that you've been fighting with shadows, taking dreams for reality, treating thoughts as if they were solid objects you had to battle or defend against. Let your jaw unclench. Let your forehead smooth. Feel how much effort you're using to hold yourself together, to maintain this sense of being someone who has problems that need solving. What if, just for this moment, you could let that effort rest? What if you could be as simple as breath, as spacious as the sky Milarepa sang about, the teaching of empty hands, empty heart, full of laughter, the teaching of suffering transformed into joy, the teaching that you don't have to wait for perfect conditions to be free. Freedom is available now, in this mess, in this uncertainty, in this exact moment, with all its imperfection. The laughing Vajra proved it. He found enlightenment, not despite his horrific past, but through the complete, unflinching honesty of facing it. So rest now. Let the image of that wild yogi in his cave, laughing at the cosmic joke, singing songs that made the Dharma dance, let that image sink into your rest. You're not building towers tonight. You're not carrying stones. You're just here, breathing, being held by darkness and softness. And somewhere in the space between thoughts, maybe you'll hear it, an echo of laughter, clear as mountain air, light as cotton, free as sky. The sound of someone who learned that joy isn't something you achieve after you fix everything. Joy is what remains when you stop resisting what is. Rest in that. Sleep in that. Dream with that laughter in your ears, knowing that you too carry the seeds of transformation, that your darkness too can become light, that your suffering too can become song. The laughing Vajra showed the way. Now breathe. Now rest. Now release your grip on everything you think you need to be. Let your breath deepen. Let the image of mountain caves fade into the darkness behind your closed eyes. And as that story settles into silence, we turn now from Tibet's high mountains to Korea's ancient temples, where another kind of laughter waited sudden, spontaneous, breaking through years of discipline like sunlight through storm clouds. In 1928, during Korea's summer, when heat pressed down on the peninsula like a thick wool blanket, and even the stones seemed to sweat, a monk sat cross-legged on a flat rock beneath an enormous ginkgo tree at Tongdosa Temple. The temple grounds were quiet in that heavy afternoon stillness when even birds rest in shade and wait for evening. The monk's name was Kobong, and he was 38 years old. He'd been a monk since childhood, had trained under the fierce Zen master Man Gong, had studied the ancient Kongans until he could recite them backwards, had sat meditation until his legs were permanently marked by the posture. He knew the sutras. He understood the teachings intellectually. He could debate any scholar and win. But he wasn't enlightened. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. And he knew it. The knowledge ate at him like hunger that food couldn't satisfy. Tongdosa was one of Korea's great temples, nestled in mountains covered with pine and bamboo. Stone steps climbed between buildings with curved tile roofs. Incense smoke drifted from halls where monks chanted sutras in voices that echoed like ancient rivers. The temple bells rang at dawn and dusk, their sound carrying across valleys where farmers tended rice paddies and children played in streams. Kobong had come here for the summer, Kyolche, the intensive meditation retreat that lasted 3 months. From dawn to midnight, the monks sat in the meditation hall, back straight, eyes half closed, maintaining what Korean Zen called don't know mind. Not thinking, not analyzing, just sitting with the great question that had no answer, the hwadu that pierced through concepts like an arrow through fog. But today was too hot for the meditation hall. The air inside was stifling, thick with the breath of 40 monks packed together on their cushions. The head monk had given permission for those who needed it to practice outside, as long as they remained on temple grounds. So Kobong had found this rock beneath the ginkgo tree, had arranged his sitting cushion. He had settled into the lotus posture he'd held for so many years that his body assumed it as naturally as water assumes the shape of whatever contains it. He had brought a fan with him. A simple thing, bamboo ribs covered with white paper, the kind you could buy in any market. He used it to move air across his face, creating a small breeze that made the heat almost bearable. He sat. He fanned himself slowly. He kept his mind on the question that had consumed him for years. What is this? Not what is enlightenment. He'd given up on questions that abstract. Just, what is this? This breath. This moment. This existence that somehow existed without him understanding how or why. Kobong had a reputation, even then, for being difficult. He drank. He was loud. He argued with his teacher, Man Gong, in front of other students, which was scandalous, disrespectful, utterly inappropriate. He'd stand outside temples and shout things like, "Somebody come cut my hair. I want to be a monk," even though he already was a monk, had been for decades. When other monks, offended by his behavior, came out with sticks to beat him, he'd laugh and say, "You can hit my body, but you can't hit my mind. If you can hit my mind, I'll become your disciple." No one could ever hit his mind. But the wildness, the drinking, the outrageous behavior, it was all covering up something Kobong wouldn't admit to anyone. He was desperate. The Dharma hadn't clicked yet. All his years of practice, all his learning, all his devotion, and still, somewhere deep inside, he knew he was missing something essential. He could smell it, taste it, feel it hovering just beyond his grasp. Like trying to remember a word that sits on the tip of your tongue. Like reaching for something in the dark and having your fingers close on empty air. The summer afternoon deepened. Shadows grew longer. Kobong sat on his rock, fan moving slowly back and forth, breath flowing in and out, mind settling into deeper and deeper stillness. Not trying to achieve anything, not forcing insight, just sitting, just being there, under the tree, on the rock, in the heat, completely present and yet somehow absent. His sense of being Kobong getting thinner and thinner until it was gossamer, barely there at all. In the ginkgo branches above him, cicadas began their evening song. In Korea, cicadas are everywhere in summer, their rising and falling buzz filling the air from afternoon until dark. Most people stop hearing them after a while, the way you stop noticing the sound of your own breathing. The sound becomes part of the background, white noise, nothing. But Kobong heard them, really heard them. The sound crashed into his awareness like a wave breaking on rocks, like a temple bell struck with full force, like the universe suddenly shouting its name. Z-z-z-z-z-z-z-z. Not a pleasant sound, not musical, just raw insistence, pure sonic existence, sound for the sake of sound, singing because that's what cicadas do when they're alive, and it's summer and the moment has arrived to sing. And in that moment, hearing that sound, really hearing it without the filter of thinking, "Oh, that's just cicadas," without any concept or label or judgment, something in Kobong's mind cracked open like an egg. Not gradually, not through careful analysis or accumulated understanding. Just crack. Wide open. He saw, he understood. Not with his thinking mind, but with his whole being. The question he'd been carrying for years, what is this, dissolved. Because this was it. The sound of cicadas singing. The heat. The fan in his hand. The rock beneath him. This exact moment, completely ordinary and completely miraculous. Nothing special. Nothing mystical. Just this. Just exactly this. Joy exploded through him like fireworks in his chest. He felt as if his entire body was laughing, as if his bones were grinning, as if every cell suddenly understood a joke so funny that trying to explain it would be ridiculous. Without thinking, because there was no more thinking. Just spontaneous action, Kobong swung his fan and struck the rock beside him with all his force. Crack. The bamboo ribs snapped. The paper tore. The fan broke into pieces in his hand. "That's it," he shouted, his voice echoing across the temple grounds, startling monks who were sweeping the courtyard, making the head monk look up from his sutra study. "That's it," and then he burst out laughing. Deep, full-body laughter that came from somewhere so deep it seemed to rise from the earth itself. He laughed until tears ran down his face. He laughed until his stomach hurt. He laughed because how could he not laugh? He'd spent 38 years looking for something that had been there all along, so obvious that he'd walked past it 10,000 times without seeing it. The cicadas kept singing. The broken fan lay scattered on the rock. Kobong sat there laughing like a madman, and the sound of his laughter mixed with the sound of the insects and became one sound, one great expression of the universe being exactly what it was. From that moment, Kobong was different. The wildness remained. He still drank, still argued, still behaved in ways that scandalized proper monks. But now it came from somewhere else. Not from desperation or performance or trying to prove anything. It came from a place of such complete freedom that conventional rules seemed as relevant as suggesting that water should flow uphill or that birds should walk instead of fly. He refused to take positions at temples. He wouldn't become an abbot, wouldn't accumulate titles or honors. "What for?" he'd say. "To sit in fancy rooms and have people bow to me? I already know what I am. I don't need anyone to confirm it." He especially refused to teach monks. When other Zen masters asked why, he'd say, "Monks are too arrogant. They think they're special because they wear robes and shave their heads. They're lazy. They want enlightenment handed to them like rice in a bowl. I'd rather teach nuns and lay people, at least they know they have to work for it." This was shocking. In traditional Korean Buddhism, monks were the elite practitioners, the serious students. For a respected Zen master to refuse to teach them was like a professor refusing to teach graduate students and insisting on only working with kindergartners. But Kobong didn't care what people thought was appropriate. He'd broken through to something beyond appropriate. He taught whomever worked hard, whomever was willing to shatter themselves to find out what remained after the shattering. Years passed. Kobong wandered from temple to temple, never staying long, never establishing his own monastery, living like a Dharma wind that blew where it wanted. His reputation grew, the fierce master with the penetrating eyes who could see through your every pretense in 30 seconds, who asked impossible kongans and accepted nothing but complete, authentic response. He gave Dharma transmission to exactly one person in his entire life. Just one. Because only one person met his standards. In 1949, a young monk named Seung San came to see him. Seung San was 22 years old and had just completed a 100-day solo retreat in the mountains where he'd eaten nothing but pine needles, drunk only rainwater, and chanted mantras 20 hours a day until he'd had what he believed was a great enlightenment experience. 3 other Zen masters had already confirmed Seung San's awakening, giving him the traditional seal of approval. The young monk was confident, almost cocky, when he arrived at Kobong's temple. All the Buddhas turned out to be a bunch of corpses, Seung San announced, using shock language to demonstrate his realization. "How about a funeral service?" Kobong just looked at him, then reached into the young monk's bag and pulled out a dried cuttlefish and a bottle of wine that Seung San had brought. They drank together. They laughed together. Kobong asked question after question, the traditional kongans, the impossible riddles that test whether someone really understands or just thinks they do. Seung San answered everyone correctly. His understanding was clear, sharp, unmistakable. Kobong nodded, satisfied. "Not bad. You're almost done, but I have one last question for you." He leaned forward, his eyes, those famous fierce eyes that missed nothing, boring into Seung San's soul. "The mouse eats cat food, but the cat bowl is broken. What does this mean?" Seung San opened his mouth to answer. And nothing. His mind, so quick and clear a moment before, suddenly went blank. He tried one answer. Kobong shook his head. He tried another head shake. His face grew red with frustration. How could he miss a question now? After answering dozens correctly, 3 Zen masters have given me Inga. Sung-san finally exploded. Why do you say I'm wrong? Kobong said nothing. He just sat there, staring at his student with complete stillness. They sat facing each other for 50 minutes. Not moving, not speaking. Like 2 tigers circling, like 2 mountains facing each other across a valley, like 2 oceans meeting at some invisible border. The silence was electric, charged with something almost visible. Seung-san's mind raced, then slowed, then stopped racing. He sank deeper into the question, deeper into not knowing, deeper into the place that had no answer because the question itself was the trap. And then suddenly he had it. Not an answer. The answer. The one that couldn't be spoken but could only be lived, could only be demonstrated through complete, immediate presence. He gave Kobong the response. We don't know what he said or did. These teaching moments are private, intimate, too precious to turn into public entertainment. But whatever Seung-san offered, Kobong saw it, really saw it. Kobong burst out laughing. That same laugh from the afternoon under the ginkgo tree, from the moment the fan broke and the cicadas sang. The laugh of recognition, of joy, of one person seeing another person wake up completely. Now you've got it, Kobong said, still laughing. Now you really understand. Not the understanding that comes from study, the understanding that breaks through your skull and rewires your whole nervous system. He gave Seung-san Dharma transmission right then. His only disciple, the only person in his entire life that Kobong deemed worthy to carry his lineage forward. Remember, Kobong said as they parted, the cicadas are always singing. Most people never really hear them. Keep your ears open. Keep your don't know mind. And when you teach others, make them work for it. No easy answers. No confirmation until they've really broken through. Seung-san went on to become one of the great Zen masters of the 20th century, bringing Korean Zen to America and Europe, teaching thousands of students, establishing centers across the world. But he always said the same thing when people asked about his teacher. Kobong was fierce. Kobong was impossible to satisfy. Kobong made me work harder than I'd ever worked in my life. And that's why I owe him everything. Kobong died in 1962, at age 72. By then he was living at Hwagesa Temple in Seoul, brought there by Seung-san, who wanted to care for his aging teacher. Even in old age, Kobong remained himself direct, uncompromising, full of a joy that needed no reason. When they buried him, they built a large granite monument on the hillside overlooking the temple. The inscription was simple, Kobong, Ten Master, the one who heard cicadas singing. But the real monument wasn't stone. It was the way he'd lived, completely awake, completely free, completely willing to be exactly who he was without apology or pretense. The way he'd transformed a summer afternoon, a simple sound, a broken fan, into a doorway that opened onto everything. The cicadas still sing every summer in Korea. In the mountains around Tongdosa, in the trees above Hwagesa, in every forest and garden where humans live, their complicated lives, and insects live their simple ones. And sometimes, maybe, a monk sitting in meditation hears them, really hears them, and something cracks open. and laughter echoes across temple grounds. And another person wakes up to the joke that's been playing all along. Now let that image settle into your bones. Kobong sitting on his rock, fan in hand, completely ordinary and completely extraordinary. The heat of the afternoon, the buzz of insects, and then crack. The breaking open, the laughter that pours out when you finally get it. What if awakening doesn't look like what you think it should? What if it's not peaceful, quiet, serene? What if it's loud? What if it makes you laugh like a fool? What if the whole journey, all the years of trying, of practicing, of studying, of thinking you're close and then realizing you're still missing it? What if all of that dissolves in a single moment and all you can do is laugh? Kobong spent 38 years preparing for that moment. 38 years of sitting, studying, practicing. And when it finally came, it wasn't because he'd figured anything out. It was because he stopped trying to figure things out. He just sat there in the heat, fanning himself, being completely present to what was actually happening. And the universe, in its generosity, cracked him open like a walnut. You don't have to spend 38 years. You don't have to break any fans. But you can learn something from Kobong's laughter. You can notice how much energy you're spending trying to get somewhere other than here. How much effort goes into being someone other than exactly who you are right now. How serious you've become about your own spiritual journey. As if enlightenment were a test you could pass through perfect study. What if you stopped trying so hard? What if you just listened, really listened to the sound of your own breath, to the silence in the room, to whatever sound is actually present right now, not trying to make it mean something, not trying to use it to achieve anything, just hearing it the way Kobong heard those cicadas, completely, without the filter of thinking. Feel your body against whatever holds it. Feel the temperature of the air on your skin. These simple, ordinary sensations, this is it. This is the great matter, right here. No mystical experience required. Just this. Just exactly this. And when you get that, really get it. Not intellectually, but with your whole being, you might laugh too. Because you've been looking everywhere else for something that was never anywhere but here. You've been waiting for the right moment, when every moment is the right moment. You've been trying to become enlightened when you're already, always, the light itself. Kobong's broken fan is your broken fan. The sound that wakes you up is whatever sound arrives in this moment. The rock you're sitting on is wherever you are right now. Nothing to achieve, nowhere to go. Just this breath, just this moment, just this ridiculous, beautiful, absolutely ordinary mystery of being alive. Let your shoulders drop, let your face soften, maybe even smile a little, thinking of that wild monk breaking his fan and laughing like the universe's greatest comedian. He found what you're looking for, and he found it in a sound, in heat, in just sitting there, being completely where he was. You can too. Not someday. Not when you're more prepared or more practiced or more worthy. Right now, in this breath, in this softness, in this letting go of the need to get anywhere at all. Rest in that. Sleep in that. And if you dream of cicadas singing, of fans breaking, of laughter that shakes the mountains, know that Kobong is still teaching, still showing the way, still proving that joy and enlightenment are the same door opened from different sides. Breathe deep now. Feel how the story dissolves into darkness, into rest, into the simple rhythm of air moving in and out of your lungs. The cicadas have stopped singing, but their silence is also teaching. Everything teaches, Kobong would say. Even sleep, even dreams, even the forgetting that comes when consciousness finally lets go. And as that fierce Korean master fades into memory, we travel now to Vietnam, where rivers flow through rice paddies and lotus flowers bloom in muddy water, where another kind of teaching flourished, gentler perhaps, but no less revolutionary, no less full of joy. In 1963, in Vietnam, where monsoon rains turned dirt roads into rivers of mud and war turned villages into ash, there was a young monk who believed something radical, that you could smile in the middle of suffering, not because suffering didn't matter, but because joy mattered more. His name was Thich Nhat Hanh, though his students simply called him Thai, which means teacher. He was 37 years old, already recognized as a brilliant scholar and poet, already a master of Vietnamese Zen. But the war was everywhere now, American helicopters thumping overhead, bombs falling on rice paddies, children running through streets with nowhere safe to run. The ancient temples still stood, at least some of them. Tuyur Templayu, where Thai had ordained as a novice at 16, remained mostly intact. Its curved tile roofs, its meditation halls filled with incense smoke, its gardens, where monks walked slowly between lotus ponds, these places still held peace, like a cupped palm holds water. Temporary, precious, threatened. But they couldn't stay in those gardens anymore. Not when the villages around them were burning. Not when Buddhist monks were setting themselves on fire in protest, their bodies turning to flame in crowded intersections. Not when everything he'd been taught about compassion demanded that he do something, anything, to help. This was the birth of what he would call engaged Buddhism, the idea that meditation and action weren't separate, that you didn't retreat from the world's suffering, but walked directly into it, carrying your practice like a lamp in darkness. He'd founded the School of Youth for Social Service, 10,000 young Vietnamese, monks and laypeople together, going into war zones to rebuild bombed villages, to treat the wounded, to teach children in schools that no longer had walls. They didn't carry weapons. They carried medicine, rice, building materials. And they carried something else, a commitment to help everyone, regardless of which side they claimed allegiance to. This made them dangerous in a different way. Both the communists and the anti-communists wanted loyalty, wanted people to choose sides, to declare enemies. But Thay's workers moved between battle lines like water flows around stones, offering aid to whoever needed it, refusing to participate in the logic of us versus them. Many of them died for this refusal, shot by soldiers who thought anyone helping the enemy was themselves the enemy, caught in crossfire, killed by mines while walking paths that used to be safe. Tay buried his students one by one, each funeral a wound that never quite healed, and yet he kept teaching them to smile. This confused Westerners when they heard about it later. How could you smile when children were dying, when villages were being napalmed, when everything good seemed to be burning? But they understood something subtle, something that sounds simple but takes a lifetime to embody. Suffering is real, and joy is also real. They don't cancel each other out. They exist together, two truths held in one breath. To deny either one is to cut yourself in half. One morning in Saigon, the city Americans called the capital of South Vietnam, already crowded with refugees fleeing the countryside, Thay was walking to a meeting with other Buddhist leaders. The streets were chaos. Motorbikes weaving between military jeeps. Vendors selling pho from street carts. The smell of star, anise and ginger rising through exhaust fumes, soldiers everywhere, young faces hard with fatigue and fear. As he walked, Thay practiced something he'd been teaching his students. Not just walking to get somewhere, but walking meditation, each step deliberate, conscious, arriving fully in that moment. Left foot touching earth, I am home. Right foot touching earth, I have arrived. Not home in some future peace, but home right now, in this step, on this broken sidewalk, in this war-torn city. A child darted in front of him, laughing, chasing a stick. Maybe 4 years old, barefoot, clothes patched and repatched. Her laughter was pure, complete, uncontaminated by any understanding of the war swirling around her. Thay stopped walking, just stood there in the middle of the crowded sidewalk, people flowing around him like water around a stone. He watched this child laugh, and something in his chest both broke and mended at the same time. This was it. He realized this was the teaching he'd been groping toward. This child, who had every reason not to laugh, whose future was uncertain, whose present was dangerous, whose country was tearing itself apart, she was laughing anyway. Not because she didn't know suffering, but because joy doesn't require perfect conditions. Joy is available now, in this moment, even when everything else is wrong. He began to smile. Not a forced smile, not a smile of denial. A smile of recognition. The war couldn't take this away, this capacity for laughter, for presence, for being fully alive, even in the middle of dying. When he arrived at the meeting, the other monks noticed something different about him. His face had a quality they'd seen before in ancient paintings of enlightened masters, not serene and removed, but deeply present, and somehow both sad and joyful at once. "Brothers," he said, "we've been making a mistake. We've been thinking that to honor suffering, we must be serious all the time. But what if seriousness is itself a kind of violence? What if the most revolutionary thing we can do is refuse to let the war steal our joy?" The room went quiet. Outside, they could hear military trucks rumbling past. Somewhere in the distance, an explosion, small, probably controlled, but everyone still flinched. The present moment. They continued, his voice soft but completely clear, contains everything. It contains the war, yes, the bombs, the fear, but it also contains this breath, this ceiling, the sound of rain that's starting to fall, each other's faces. If we lose the present moment while waiting for peace to arrive someday in the future, we lose our lives. We become ghosts, haunting our own existence, waiting for permission to be happy. One of the older monks spoke up. "But Thay, how can we be happy when there's so much suffering? Isn't that selfish? Isn't that ignoring reality? Is that child ignoring reality when she laughs?" Thay asked. "Or is she more deeply in touch with reality than we are? We think reality is only the war. But reality is also the flower that blooms in the bomb crater. The mother who still sings to her baby even though their home was destroyed. The fact that the sky is still blue above the smoke." He paused, looking at each monk in turn. "If we wait until all suffering ends before we allow ourselves joy, we will never be joyful. And if we're not joyful, if we're just angry or sad or serious all the time, how can we help anyone? We'll burn out. We'll become bitter. We'll start creating more suffering even while trying to end it." "So what do you suggest?" someone asked. "I suggest we practice smiling," Thay said. "Not fake smiles. real smiles. Smiles that come from recognizing that we're alive, that we're breathing, that this moment, even this difficult moment, is a kind of miracle. We practice walking meditation not just in the temple, but on the streets. We practice breathing consciously, even when bombs are falling. We practice being fully present to joy, even while being fully present to suffering. "Isn't that impossible?" the young monk asked. "It's impossible," Thay agreed. "And also, it's the only possible thing. The alternative is to be half alive, to be so consumed by what's wrong that we miss what's right. And then we've already lost. The war has already won, because it's turned us into people who've forgotten how to be fully human." In the months that followed, Thay began teaching this more explicitly. He wrote a gatha, a short verse for mindfulness practice that his students would recite. Breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in the present moment, I know this is the only moment. The smile wasn't optional. It was part of the practice. Even when it felt absurd, especially when it felt absurd. His students from the School of Youth for Social Service began carrying this practice into the villages. They would arrive in a place that had just been bombed, where people were digging through rubble looking for family members, where the smell of death hung in the air. And they would help rebuilding, treating wounds, holding traumatized children. But they would also model something else. They would walk slowly. They would breathe consciously. And sometimes, when it was appropriate, they would smile. Not the smile of everything's fine. The smile of, I see you. I'm here. We're alive. That matters. One story Thay loved to tell was about Sister Chan Kong, one of his closest students and collaborators. She was working in a village that had been devastated by fighting. A mother had lost her entire family, husband, 3 children, all killed in a single afternoon. The woman was beyond grief, beyond tears. She just sat in the ruins of her home, rocking back and forth, making a sound like a wounded animal. Sister Chan Kong sat with her for hours, didn't try to fix anything, didn't offer empty comfort, just sat there, breathing, being present. And after several hours, she began to hum, very quietly, an old Vietnamese lullaby, the kind mothers sing to babies. The grieving woman stopped rocking, looked up with eyes that seemed to be seeing something from very far away. Sister Chan Kong kept humming. Then she began to smile. Not at the woman, just smiling, like someone remembering something precious. And slowly, so slowly, the woman's face began to soften. Not into happiness. That would come much later, if it came at all. But into something like recognition, like remembering that she was still human, still connected to the human things. Like the warmth of that lullaby could reach her even in the cold place she'd been trapped in. That's what the smile does, Thay would explain. It reaches across suffering without denying suffering. It says, yes, this is terrible. And also, we're still here. Life is still happening. The sun is still rising. And that's not nothing. In 1966, Thay's activism got him exiled. Both the communist and non-communist governments decided he was too dangerous, too unwilling to be controlled, too committed to a vision of peace that didn't align with anyone's political goals. He was 40 years old when he left Vietnam, not knowing he wouldn't be allowed to return for 39 years. He ended up in France, where he eventually established Plum Village, a monastery and practice center that would become the largest Buddhist monastery in Europe. Thousands of people came there to learn his way of practice: mindful walking, conscious breathing, smiling meditation, and what he called engaged Buddhism, bringing practice into every aspect of life. He taught Westerners, many of whom came carrying their own wars, depression, anxiety, trauma, the modern warfare of minds at battle with themselves. And he taught them the same thing he'd learned in Vietnam. You don't wait for peace to practice peace. You practice peace now, in this breath, in this step, in this smile. Sometimes your joy is the source of your smile, he would say, but sometimes your smile is the source of your joy. People would try it, skeptically at first. Forcing a smile while anxious or sad felt fake, manipulative, like lying to yourself. But if you stayed with it, if you smiled gently while breathing, not a huge grin, but just a soft upturn of the lips, the slight crinkle of eyes, something strange happened. The physiology of smiling sent signals to the brain. The act of smiling, even without a reason, created a reason. The body led the mind toward joy, like taking someone's hand and leading them toward light. Tai lived until he was 95, dying in 2022 at the same temple in Hue, where he'd first ordained as a teenage novice. The war he'd lived through had ended decades before, but the teaching he'd brought back from that war lived on. That joy is not a luxury you earn after suffering ends, but a practice you cultivate in the midst of suffering. That being fully alive means being present to all of it, the beauty and the horror, the laughter and the tears, the war and the flower growing in the bomb crater. Perhaps you can feel it now, the invitation in this teaching, not to be happy when you're not happy, not to fake anything or pretend suffering doesn't exist, but to notice what's also here, alongside the suffering. The breath moving in your body, the softness holding you, the simple fact that you're alive right now, in this moment, reading or hearing these words. What if you smiled, just a little, just the corners of your mouth turning up, your face softening, not because everything's okay, but because this moment contains you, breathing, being, and that's worth acknowledging. That's worth honoring with the smallest gesture of appreciation. Tay would say, the present moment is filled with joy and happiness. If you are attentive, you will see it. Not because he was naive or because he hadn't seen terrible things, but because he'd learned, walking through war zones, sitting with dying students, facing exile from his homeland, he'd learned that joy doesn't come from perfect conditions. It comes from perfect attention, from seeing completely what's here, including the small miracles we usually overlook because we're so focused on what's wrong. Your breath is a miracle. The fact that your heart beats without you telling it to. The way consciousness arises each morning from sleep. The existence of this moment, which never existed before and will never exist again. Small miracles. Quiet miracles. Easy to miss when you're waiting for the big dramatic experience that will finally make you happy. So let your face soften now. Let a gentle smile emerge, not for any reason, just as an experiment. Breathing in, you calm your body. Breathing out, you smile. And notice, does something shift? Does the quality of this moment change slightly? Does the darkness feel a little less heavy? The rest a little more welcome? Tay taught that this smile, this simple, gentle smile, is a kind of revolution. It refuses to let circumstances dictate your inner state. It claims your right to be present, to be alive, to touch joy, even when sorrow is also present. The war couldn't take that away from him. The exile couldn't take it away. The loss of his homeland, the death of his students, the weight of witnessing so much suffering, none of it could take away his capacity to walk slowly, breathe deeply, and smile at the miracle of being alive. And if he could find that in the middle of war, perhaps you can find it here, in the middle of your own difficulties, in the middle of this ordinary night that contains both your worries and your rest, both your incompleteness and your wholeness. Rest now in that smile. Let it soften into sleep. And know that they would say this moment of rest is also practice, also sacred, also worthy of your gentle appreciation. The long road turns to joy, not at the end, right here, right now, in this breath, in this smile, in this simple, profound act of being completely present to what is. Breathe deeply. Feel how the teaching settles into your body like rain soaking into earth. They, walking through Saigon, smiling at bombs. Sister Chan Kong humming lullabies in ruins. The little girl laughing in the street. All of them showing the same truth. Joy is not the absence of suffering. Joy is the presence of presence. And as that Vietnamese monastery fades into the softness of sleep, as Thay's gentle smile becomes part of your own rest, we travel now to a place you might not expect, to a monastery garden in medieval Japan, where joy emerged not from peace, but from the willingness to find beauty in brokenness. In 15th century Japan, during the late Muromachi period, when tea ceremony was becoming an art form, and Zen monasteries dotted the mountainsides like scattered prayer beads, there lived a potter named Hiro in a small village near Kyoto. His workshop sat beside a stream where he collected clay, its walls blackened with smoke from decades of kiln fires. Hiro was known throughout the region for his tea bowls, simple, elegant pieces that tea masters sought for their ceremonies. He'd learned his craft from his father, who'd learned from his grandfather, a lineage of clay and fire stretching back generations. Each bowl Hiro created was unique, shaped by hand on a wheel that had been in his family for 80 years. But Hiro had a problem. He was a perfectionist. If a bowl had the slightest asymmetry, the smallest irregularity in the glaze, even a variation in color that no one else would notice, he'd smash it. His workshop floor was littered with shards of what others would have called beautiful. His wife pleaded with him to stop destroying perfectly good work. His apprentices whispered that their master had lost his mind. "These are not worthy," Hiro would say, holding up a bowl that looked flawless to everyone else. "The lip is uneven by half a grain of rice. The glaze pooled wrong on the left side. This is not excellence. This is compromise." One autumn day, a Zen monk named Daiki came to Hiro's workshop. Daiki was old past 70, with a face creased like dried persimmon and eyes that seemed to see through surfaces into whatever lay beneath. He was the abbot of a small temple in the mountains, and he'd walked 3 days to reach Hiro's village. "I hear you make the finest tea bowls in the province," Daiki said. Hiro bowed. "I attempt to, honored teacher. I would like to commission a bowl for our temple. We're planning a special tea ceremony next spring to honor our founder. We need something extraordinary." Hiro felt pressure settle on his shoulders like a physical weight. Something extraordinary. For a Zen temple. For an important ceremony. This was the commission every potter dreamed of, and the one every potter feared. "I will create something worthy," Hiro promised. For 6 months, Hiro worked. He threw bowl after bowl, each one dismissed before it even finished drying. Too thick, too thin. The curve was wrong. The foot too high, the color unbalanced. His wife stopped coming to the workshop because she couldn't bear to watch him destroy beauty over and over. His apprentices worked in silence, afraid to speak. Finally, in early spring when cherry blossoms were just beginning to open, Hiro created a bowl that satisfied him. The shape was perfect, slightly irregular but intentionally so, following principles he'd learned from decades of practice. The glaze was exquisite, a warm ivory that pooled to darker tones in exactly the right places. The weight in the hand was ideal. The lip met the mouth just so. He fired it with hands that trembled slightly. When he opened the kiln and saw it intact, uncracked, perfectly realized, he wept. This was it. This was the bowl worthy of Daiki's temple, worthy of the ceremony, worthy of his family's legacy. He wrapped it carefully in silk and placed it in a wooden box he'd made specifically for this purpose. Then he set out for the temple, walking the mountain paths with the box held like a child in his arms. The temple was 3 days' walk from his village. On the second day, as Hiro crossed a narrow bridge over a ravine, his foot slipped on moss-covered wood. He didn't fall, caught himself on the railing, but the box flew from his hands, sailed through air that seemed to slow down, and crashed onto rocks 30 feet below. The sound of breaking pottery is distinctive. It's not a sharp crack, but a complex shattering, multiple notes at once. The sound of something becoming many things. Hiro heard it and felt something break in his chest that was more than ceramic. He climbed down to the rocks. The bowl lay in 7 major pieces and dozens of smaller fragments. 6 months of work. His finest creation. Destroyed because of one moment of carelessness on wet wood. He gathered the pieces carefully, wrapped them in the silk that had meant to protect the whole bowl, placed them in the box that now held only fragments. Then he sat on the rocks and stared at the river rushing past and wondered if this was the universe's way of telling him he'd never be good enough. But he'd made a promise. So he continued to the temple, carrying a box of broken pieces instead of a masterpiece. Daiki was in the temple garden when Hiro arrived, raking gravel into patterns that looked like water flowing. He looked up as Hiro approached, saw the potter's face, and set down his rake. It broke, Hiro said simply. His voice was empty. I brought the pieces. I don't know why. Perhaps to show you what I'd created before my clumsiness destroyed it. I will return your payment. I will try again, though I don't know if I can create something as perfect as what I lost. Show me, Daiki said. Hiro opened the box. The fragments lay there, edges sharp, the beautiful glaze now interrupted by cracks. Daiki picked up the largest piece, turned it in the light. You're right, he said. This was exceptional work. The shape, the glaze, the weight. You achieved something rare. Hiro felt his throat tighten with grief. But it was not finished. Daiki continued. What do you mean? It was perfect before I dropped it. Was it? Daiki's eyes crinkled. Come. Let me show you something. He led Hiro deeper into the temple complex, to a small tea room Hiro hadn't seen on his previous visit. Inside, on a simple wooden stand, sat a tea bowl. It was old, perhaps 200 years, and it was covered in cracks. But the cracks weren't ugly. They'd been repaired with what looked like gold. Shining seams that turned the fractures into something like lightning frozen in ceramic, like branches of a golden tree, like a map of where the bowl had been broken and chosen to continue existing anyway. Kintsugi, Daiki said softly. Golden joinery. When something breaks, We have choices. We can discard it. We can attempt to hide the damage, or we can repair it in a way that honors what happened, that makes the breaking part of the object's story, that transforms damage into beauty. Hiro stared at the bowl. It was more beautiful than any unbroken bowl he'd ever seen. The gold cracks made it unique, impossible to replicate, precious in a way that perfection could never be. This bowl, Daiki continued, belonged to a tea master who dropped it during a ceremony in front of the shogun. He was devastated, but instead of commissioning a new one, he asked a craftsman to repair it this way. The shogun was so moved by the result that he declared it a national treasure. Now, generations later, we still use it in our most important ceremonies. He turned to Hiro. Your bowl was perfect. But perfection is cold. Perfection is complete. It has nowhere to go, nothing more to become. This broken bowl, this has potential. This can become something that teaches. Teaches what? Hiro asked. That breaking is not the end. That damage can become beauty. That our cracks and imperfections, the places where we've been hurt, where we've failed, where we've fallen, these can be filled with gold. Not hidden. Not disguised. Transformed. Daiki smiled. In Zen, we have a concept called wabi-sabi. The beauty of things imperfect, impermanent, incomplete. You spend your life trying to make perfect bowls, destroying anything that doesn't meet your impossible standards. But what if imperfection is where beauty actually lives? What if the crack is what makes something real? Hiro looked at his box of fragments, at the silk that held 7 pieces of his finest work, at the sharp edges that proved his failure. I don't know how to do this repair, he said quietly. I do, Daiki replied. Or rather, I know someone who does. Stay at the temple. Learn. And when your bowl is repaired, when its cracks are filled with gold, then we'll use it in our ceremony. We'll honor our founder by demonstrating what he taught, that enlightenment isn't perfection. It's the acceptance of imperfection. It's finding the sacred in the broken. Hiro stayed at the temple for 2 months. He learned kintsugi from a craftsman Daiki brought from Kyoto, learned to mix the urushi lacquer, to dust it with gold powder, to join the pieces with patience and precision. The work was slow, meditative. Each crack had to be carefully aligned, each gold seam perfectly placed. As he worked, something in Hiro began to change. He'd spent his whole life trying to eliminate imperfection from his work. Now, he was intentionally highlighting it, making it visible, turning it into the bowl's most striking feature. And the strange thing was, the bowl was becoming more beautiful than it had been whole. The cracks formed patterns he never could have planned. The gold caught light in unexpected ways. The bowl now had a history visible on its surface. It had been perfect. It had broken. It had been lovingly repaired. That story was written in gold on clay, and people who held it could feel the journey. When he finished, when the last seam was sealed and polished, Hiro held the bowl and wept again. But these were different tears. Not tears of achievement or pride. Tears of recognition. He'd been wrong about everything. At the spring ceremony, with cherry blossoms falling like snow outside the tea room windows, the bowl was used for the first time since its repair. The tea master who prepared the tea held it reverently, turned it so the gold cracks caught firelight, and smiled. This bowl teaches us something essential, he said to the assembled guests. It teaches us that we don't become beautiful despite our scars. We become beautiful because of them. Every crack, every repair, every place where we've been broken and chosen to continue, these are what make us precious. Hero watched people pass the bowl, watched them trace the golden seams with their fingers, watched them understand something without words. And he understood too, finally, what Daiki had been trying to teach him. He went back to his workshop a different man. He still made tea bowls, still aimed for excellence. But he stopped destroying the imperfect ones. He started seeing beauty in asymmetry, in unexpected glaze patterns, in the slight wobble of a bowl that fit human hands better than geometric perfection ever could. And when a bowl broke his or someone else's, he didn't see disaster. He saw possibility. He saw a chance to make something more beautiful than what had been lost. He saw gold waiting to fill cracks not yet made. Years later, when Daiki was dying, he sent for Hiro. The potter came and sat beside the old monk's mat, holding his paper-thin hand. "That bowl," Daiki said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's still the most requested piece for ceremonies. People come from across Japan to see it. But do you know what makes it truly precious?" "The gold?" Hiro asked. "The gold is beautiful. But what makes it precious is that you were willing to let it break. You were willing to accept that your perfect thing had become imperfect. You were willing to repair rather than replace. That willingness, that's the gold. Really. The lacquer and powder are just symbols." He smiled, his eyes distant. "We're all broken. You know, every single one of us. Cracked by life, by loss, by our own mistakes. And we spend so much time trying to look whole, trying to hide the damage. But what if we filled our cracks with gold instead? What if we let people see where we've been broken and how we've healed? What if we understood that broken and repaired is more beautiful than never broken at all?" He died 3 days later. Hiro made a small tea bowl for his memorial service. And when it came out of the kiln, he intentionally dropped it. Then he repaired it with gold, creating cracks that looked like sun rays. It wasn't an accident this time. It was a choice, a way of saying, "I understand now. Breaking is part of beauty. Healing is the gold that makes us shine." Perhaps you feel it too, resting here in darkness. You've been broken. Everyone has. Life cracks us. Loss, failure, disappointment, the 1,000 small deaths that come from just being human. And maybe you've been trying to hide those cracks, to present yourself as whole when inside you feel shattered. But what if Hiro's lesson applies to you too? What if your cracks are where your light gets in? What if the places you've been broken and healing are the most beautiful things about you? You don't have to be perfect. You were never supposed to be perfect. Perfection is cold, complete, finished. But you're warm, ongoing, still becoming. Your scars are proof you've lived. Your repairs are proof you're strong. The gold in your cracks is the compassion you've learned, the wisdom you've earned, the beauty that only comes from being broken and choosing to continue anyway. Let that sink in as you sink into rest. You are not damaged goods. You are kintsugi, precious, exactly because of where you've been cracked and how you've healed. The gold is real. The beauty is real. And you are more extraordinary than any perfect thing could ever be. Breathe into that. Feel your body, imperfect and perfect at once. Feel your heart, which has been broken and keeps beating. Feel your mind, which has shattered and reassembled itself more times than you can count. All of it is gold-filled cracks catching light. Rest in that golden light. Sleep in the knowledge that your imperfections are not flaws to fix, but stories to honor. Dream of bowls broken and remade, of cracks filled with precious metal, of beauty that could only exist after breaking, after repair, after the courage to be seen as exactly what you are, broken, mended, and absolutely radiant. And as that tea bowl glowing with golden seams fades into the dark behind your eyes, as Hiro and Daiki and the temple in the mountains dissolve into sleep, we move now to another part of Japan, where 3 monks walked into a town with no teaching but laughter, and left behind a legacy that still echoes today. In ancient China, during the Tang dynasty, when Buddhist monasteries flourished along mountain rivers and stone steps led to temples hidden in mist, there appeared 3 monks unlike any others. They had no temple. They carried no sutras. They owned nothing but their grey robes and walking staffs. And they never spoke a single word. They only laughed. The villagers first encountered them on a spring morning when plum blossoms were just beginning to open, their white petals drifting through air that smelled of wet earth and new grass. The market square was filling with morning vendors, the tofu seller arranging his squares of pressed bean curd on wooden trays, the tea merchant pouring samples from clay pots, children running between stalls with coins clutched in their fists. Into this ordinary bustle walked 3 monks. They were middle-aged men, though it was hard to say exactly how old. Their faces were weathered from walking, their robes faded from sun and rain. But what struck everyone immediately was their expressions. They were grinning, broadly, as if they'd just heard the funniest joke in the world and couldn't stop thinking about it. One of them saw a chicken pecking at scattered grain near the vegetable stall, stopped, pointed at it, and burst into laughter. Deep, rolling, belly laughter that echoed across the square. The other 2 looked where he was pointing, saw the chicken, and immediately began laughing too. They laughed so hard they had to lean on each other for support. They laughed until tears ran down their faces. The chicken just kept pecking at grain. The villagers watched in confusion. What was funny about a chicken? It was just a chicken doing what chickens do. But the monks kept laughing, pointing at the chicken, slapping their knees, holding their stomachs. Finally, one of them straightened up, wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and then saw a cloud passing overhead. He pointed up. The other 2 looked up, and all 3 collapsed into fresh waves of laughter, pointing at the sky, doubling over, gasping for air. The tofu seller approached them cautiously. "Honored masters, is something wrong? Can we help you?" The monks just looked at him and started laughing again. Not at him. Exactly. More like they were laughing at something about the whole situation. Him asking questions. Them laughing. All of them standing in a market square on a Tuesday morning while the universe kept being exactly what it was. "Are you enlightened?" someone asked tentatively. People had heard stories of awakened beings who behaved strangely. Maybe this was that. One of the monks tried to answer. He opened his mouth. A sound came out, ha, and then more laughter. He couldn't form words through the laughter. None of them could. They tried to be serious, tried to compose themselves, but every attempt just triggered fresh eruptions of mirth. The villagers didn't know what to make of this, but here's what happened. After about 10 minutes of watching these monks laugh at nothing, at everything, at chickens and clouds and tofu and their own inability to stop laughing, a few villagers started smiling. Then a few more. Then someone giggled. And then suddenly half the market square was laughing too, not really knowing why, just infected by the sheer absurdity and joy of three grown men who found existence itself hilarious. The three monks stayed in the area for several days. They slept under trees. They accepted food when offered, but never begged. They walked through the village and the surrounding countryside, and everywhere they went, the same thing happened. They would see something: a dog scratching itself, a child crying over a broken toy, an old woman bent under the weight of firewood, rain puddles reflecting sky, and they would start laughing. Not cruel laughter, never mocking. There was no meanness in it. It was more like the laughter of someone who'd suddenly gotten the joke that everyone else was still trying to solve. The cosmic joke. The one embedded in the fact that existence exists, that anything is happening at all, that we're all here playing our parts with such seriousness when the whole thing is essentially absurd and beautiful and impossible and real all at once. A scholar named Liu approached them on the third day. Liu was a learned man who'd studied Buddhist texts for decades. He'd read the sutras, understood the philosophy, could debate the finer points of emptiness and form. But he wasn't happy. All his knowledge sat in his head like stones, heavy and cold. "Masters," Liu said formally, bowing, "I seek to understand your teaching. What truth have you realized that brings such joy?" The three monks looked at each other. One of them tried to answer. He opened his mouth. The truth is, and then couldn't continue because he'd started laughing. He tried again. All things are. More laughter. The third attempt, Buddha nature. But by then, all three were laughing so hard they'd sat down on the ground, holding their sides. Liu watched this display with growing frustration. "Please, I'm serious. I've been studying the Dharma my whole life. I want to understand what you've understood." One of the monks managed to catch his breath long enough to look at Liu with eyes crinkled in mirth. He pointed at Liu, then at himself, then at the ground, then at the sky. Then he put his hands together in a gesture that seemed to say, "It's all this. All of it. Can't you see?" And then he was laughing again. Liu left angry. These weren't enlightened masters. They were madmen. Fools who'd lost their minds somewhere along the path and now wandered the countryside laughing at nothing. But that night, lying in bed, Liu couldn't stop thinking about them. Their faces, the genuineness of their joy, the way they'd pointed at everything at him, at themselves, at earth and sky, as if it were all the same thing, all equally miraculous, all equally funny. What could possibly be that funny? The three monks stayed for 2 weeks. In that time, they never spoke a word, never taught formally, never gave a discourse or quoted a sutra. They just laughed. And something strange happened in the village. People started laughing more, not at the monks anymore with them. Or rather, they started noticing what the monks seemed to be noticing: the absurdity of taking everything so seriously, the comedy of human existence, the fact that we make elaborate plans as if we're going to live forever, worry about things that won't matter in a year, fight over possessions we can't take with us, define ourselves by opinions that will change. The village became lighter. Children who'd been scolded for being too loud were suddenly allowed to be loud again. Old quarrels between neighbors seemed too silly to maintain. The tea merchant started giving free samples to anyone who smiled at him. The tofu seller began cracking jokes while making change. Even Farmer Chen, who hadn't smiled since his wife died 3 years ago, was spotted grinning at his ox one morning. When asked what was funny, he said, "This ox. Just look at him. standing there being an ox, doing ox things with that serious ox face. He couldn't finish. He was laughing. On the 15th day, the 3 monks prepared to leave. The whole village gathered at the edge of town to see them off. Many brought gifts, rice, fruit, copper quan, new sandals. The monks accepted everything with broad smiles, bowing repeatedly. One of them tried to say something, perhaps thank you, but of course dissolved into laughter instead. They gathered the gifts into their cloth bags, shouldered their walking staffs, and began walking down the dusty road toward the next town. Just before the curve that would take them out of sight, they turned back. All 3 stopped, looked at the assembled villagers, and suddenly their faces grew serious. Completely serious. For the first time since arriving, they weren't smiling. The villagers held their breath. Surely now they would speak. Surely now they would reveal the great teaching, the secret wisdom, the profound truth they'd been holding all this time. The 3 monks stood there in perfect stillness. Their faces were serene, empty of expression, like classical paintings of enlightened masters in meditation. The moment stretched. The silence deepened. And then, all at once, all 3 monks broke into the biggest, loudest, most unrestrained laughter yet. They laughed so hard they had to hold each other up. They laughed until they were gasping. One of them actually fell down in the road, rolling in the dust, clutching his belly. The villagers started laughing too. They couldn't help it. The absurdity was too perfect, the serious faces, the dramatic pause, the expectation, and then this explosion of mirth. It was like the monks were saying, "Did you really think we were going to get serious? Did you really think there was some solemn wisdom we were withholding? The laughter is the wisdom. You fools. The joke is the teaching." Still laughing, the 3 monks picked themselves up, dusted off their robes, waved one more time, and disappeared around the bend. Years passed. The 3 monks wandered across China, never staying long in one place, never speaking, always laughing. They became famous. Stories spread across the provinces. Have you heard about the 3 laughing monks? They came through our town last summer. Strangest thing you ever saw. But I swear, for a week after they left, nobody could stay angry at anything. They appeared in winter and summer, in wealthy cities and poor villages, at mountaintop monasteries and riverside camps, everywhere the same. They would arrive, see something, anything, and begin laughing. And everywhere they went, something softened in the people they encountered. Some hardness in the heart loosened. Some seriousness dissolved. Buddhist scholars debated what they represented. Were they awakened beings, crazy wisdom teachers in the tradition of the Indian cicadas, or just 3 men who genuinely lost their minds and wandered China laughing at clouds? The monks themselves offered no clarification. They never stayed long enough to be questioned properly. They never gave a teaching that could be written down, studied, analyzed. They just laughed and moved on. One autumn, in a small village by a river, all 3 monks fell ill at once. The same fever, contracted perhaps from drinking bad water or sleeping in a cold rain. The villagers took them in, laid them on cots in the town hall, tried to nurse them back to health. But the fever was strong. The monks grew weaker. And finally, on a morning when maple leaves were falling like red rain outside the windows, one of the monks died. The villagers gathered around the 2 remaining monks, expecting something. Grief, tears, A funeral chant. Some acknowledgement of loss. The two surviving monks looked at their dead companion. They looked at each other. And then, incredibly, impossibly, they began to laugh. Not nervous laughter. Not hysterical laughter. The same deep, genuine, belly laughter they'd always had. They laughed, looking at their dead friend's peaceful face. They laughed so hard that tears ran down their cheeks, though, whether from laughter or grief or both, no one could say. "How can you laugh?" someone whispered, shocked. "Your brother just died." One of the monks tried to speak. He pointed at the body, at the windows where leaves were falling, at his own chest, at the gathered villagers. The gesture seemed to say, "Look, all of this, birth, death, leaves falling, hearts beating, the whole impossible dance. How can you not laugh? According to custom, the body should be washed and the clothes changed before cremation. But when they went to undress the dead monk, they discovered he'd hidden something under his robes. Fireworks. Chinese fireworks. The kind used for festivals. He'd carefully sewn them into the lining of his robe. The two surviving monks saw this, and their laughter doubled. They knew they'd known him for decades. Of course he would do something like this. Of course. Even in death. One more joke. One more teaching about not taking any of it too seriously. They cremated him as he was, clothes and fireworks and all. When the fire reached the hidden explosives, they went off bangs and whistles and bursts of colored sparks shooting into the autumn sky. The whole village burst into laughter despite themselves. Even grieving, even at a funeral, they were laughing. The two remaining monks laughed the loudest. A few months later, the second monk died. Same thing. He'd hidden bells under his robes, and when they placed him on the funeral pyre, the bells rang as the body shifted in the heat. The remaining monk laughed until he could barely stand. And then, a year after that, the last monk felt his own death approaching. He was old now, worn by decades of walking, his body ready to stop. He gathered the villagers where he was staying, pointed to his chest, and shook his head. His time was coming. "Will you finally speak?" someone asked. "Some last words? Some teaching to leave behind?" The old monk smiled. He opened his mouth as if to speak. Everyone leaned forward. This was it. After all these years, the wisdom, the explanation, the key to their laughter. What came out was, "Ha!" and then more laughter. Even at the edge of death, facing the final unknown, he was laughing. Laughing at death, at life, at all of them gathered around, waiting for profound last words, at himself for having nothing to say, at the absurdity of consciousness getting ready to wink out and wondering what that would be like. He died laughing. When they prepared his body, they found he'd sewn nothing into his robes. No fireworks, no bells. But around his neck, on a string, hung a small mirror. Just a polished piece of bronze, no bigger than a coin. The villagers passed it around, confused. What did it mean? One of the village children looked into it, saw his own face reflected back, and giggled. "It's me," he said. "I can see me." And suddenly everyone understood. The mirror was the teaching. Look. See yourself. See that you're here, conscious, alive, part of this impossible existence. See your face, which has been 1,000 faces before and will be 1,000 faces after, all of them temporarily arranged as you. See the joke, that nothing is permanent, but everything is precious. That life is tragedy and comedy at once. That you're going to die. Yes, but you're alive now. You're alive now. How can you not laugh? After the 3 monks were gone, their legend grew. People told stories about them for generations. Temple murals depicted them walking together, heads thrown back in laughter. Poems were written. Scholars debated their meaning. But the real legacy wasn't in stories or art. It was in the way people who'd encountered them never forgot how to laugh at themselves. Never forgot that seriousness, while sometimes necessary, was also a kind of chosen blindness. Never forgot that underneath all the human drama, underneath the suffering and struggle and striving, there was something else, a kind of cosmic humor, a recognition that existence itself was both impossible and somehow happening anyway. The 3 laughing monks never founded a school, never wrote texts, never established a lineage. They didn't need to. They'd taught the unteachable, transmitted the untransmittable. They'd shown that enlightenment might not look like serene meditation or profound wisdom. It might look like 3 old friends wandering the countryside, laughing at chickens and clouds and death itself, free from everything, including the need to explain their freedom. They'd understood what Buddha meant when he held up a flower and said nothing. They'd understood what Kashyapa meant when he smiled. The teaching beyond words. The truth that can only be laughed, never spoken. And somewhere in China today, on some dusty road between villages, maybe 3 monks are still walking. Or maybe it's 3 different people, a teacher, a farmer, a grandmother who've gotten the joke and can't help grinning. Maybe they'll never speak about what they know because there's nothing to say about it. Maybe they'll just laugh, and in that laughter, transmit more than 1,000 sutras ever could. Maybe you've already met them. Maybe they smiled at you once, for no reason, and something in you smiled back. Maybe that moment of shared laughter was the teaching. Maybe it's already working. Even now, even as you lie here in the dark, thinking about 3 monks who found everything hilarious and nothing worth explaining. Maybe the cosmic joke is, you already know what they know. You've always known. You just forgot that you're allowed to laugh about it. You forgot that joy doesn't require permission or perfect conditions or enlightenment. It just requires noticing what's actually happening this breath, this moment, this impossible fact of existing, and finding it all so absurd and beautiful that you can't help but smile. Feel your lips turning up now. Just slightly. A small smile emerging from the darkness. Not because anything changed, but because you're here, you're alive, you're breathing. And somewhere, 3 monks who died 1,000 years ago are still laughing about that. Rest in that laughter. Sleep in that recognition. And if you wake in the night and find yourself smiling for no reason, don't question it. Don't try to make sense of it. Just let it be. You've gotten the joke, even if you can't explain it. You've joined the lineage of laughing monks, the secret transmission of cosmic humor, the teaching that has no words and needs none. The 3 monks are gone, but the laughter remains. In you, in this moment, in the simple, absurd miracle of being aware that you exist. How can you not laugh? How can you not smile? How can you not rest easy, knowing that whatever happens, it's all part of the cosmic comedy, and you get to be both audience and actor, laughing at the show and laughing at yourself laughing. Let that thought carry you into sleep. Let the echo of ancient laughter become your lullaby. 3 monks walk into your dreams, point at you, and start laughing. And this time, you know why. Breathe deep smile in the darkness, rest. And as those three laughing figures fade into the mist of memory and dream, we turn now to another time, another place, where laughter took a different form, not loud and boisterous, but quiet and subtle, hiding in the spaces between words, waiting to be discovered in the most unlikely places. In ancient India, during the time when the Buddha's teachings were still spreading across kingdoms like rains soaking into thirsty earth, there lived a king whose name has been lost to time, but whose story remains. He ruled a prosperous kingdom in the northern territories, fields of rice that stretched to the horizon, cities where merchants from distant lands came to trade silk and spices, temples where bells rang at dawn and dusk. This king had everything a man could want. His palace had 300 rooms, each more magnificent than the last. Marble floors reflected candlelight like captured stars. Gardens bloomed with flowers whose names most people would never know. Peacocks wandered the courtyards, their calls echoing off fountains that never stopped flowing. He had wealth beyond counting. Gold and silver filled storerooms beneath the palace. Jewels sat in carved wooden boxes, rubies like frozen fire, sapphires like fragments of sky, emeralds that seemed to hold entire forests in their depths. He could buy anything, commission anything, possess anything his heart desired. He had power. When he spoke, 500 ministers listened. When he commanded, armies moved. His word was law across lands it would take weeks to cross on horseback. People bowed when he passed, their foreheads touching dust. And he had been miserable for years, not obviously miserable. He smiled at banquets. He laughed at entertainers' jokes. He played his part convincingly, the satisfied ruler, the fortunate man, the one who had achieved what others only dreamed of. But lying in bed at night, on sheets softer than clouds, surrounded by luxury that would feed a village for a year, he felt empty. The wealth didn't satisfy. There was always more to acquire, more to protect, more to worry about losing. The power didn't satisfy. Every decision created consequences that rippled outward. People helped here, people harmed there. Endless complexity that never resolved into simple good. The pleasures didn't satisfy. The finest foods became ordinary after the 100th meal. The most beautiful music faded into background noise. Even the company of his wives and concubines, women chosen for their beauty and wit, left him feeling alone. He was 53 years old. His hair had gone grey. His joints ached in the mornings, and he'd begun to notice something that terrified him. He was getting old. The same old age that came for beggars and merchants and farmers was coming for him too. His wealth couldn't stop it. His power couldn't command it away. Time was going to take everything: the palace, the gardens, the jewels, the body itself, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, he could do about it. One night, unable to sleep despite the silk pillows and the gentle breeze from the garden and the distant sound of fountains, he rose and walked through his palace. Guards straightened as he passed but said nothing. He wandered through rooms he owned but barely knew, a library he'd never read, a music hall he'd never played in, chambers full of objects he'd acquired and forgotten. He came to a window that overlooked the city. Below, in the streets, he could see lights from humble homes, families eating dinner, a baker preparing bread for morning, a mother rocking a child to sleep, and he felt a sharp pang of something he couldn't name: envy. Maybe, for people whose lives were simple enough to fit in a single room, whose possessions could be counted, whose deaths wouldn't require elaborate state ceremonies. In that moment, He made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone else. He was going to leave. All of it. The palace, the kingdom, the wealth, the power. He was going to walk away from everything he'd spent his life accumulating and go into the forest to live as a monk. Not because he was particularly religious, not because he'd had some great spiritual revelation, but because he'd reached the end of himself, and he needed to find out if there was anything else beyond the endless acquiring and protecting and worrying that had filled his decades. He didn't announce it formally, didn't abdicate with ceremonies and speeches. He simply wrote letters to his ministers, explaining that his son would rule, to his wives, releasing them from their duties, to his advisors, thanking them for their service. Then, before dawn, wearing the simplest robe he could find, carrying nothing, he walked out of his palace and never looked back. The forest he entered was unlike anything in his manicured gardens. Wild, untamed. Trees grew where they wanted. Vines hung like curtains. Birds called from branches he couldn't see. The ground was uneven roots to trip over, stones to stub toes against, mud that stuck to feet. He walked for days. Sometimes villages appeared and he begged for food, which was humiliating at first, but became easier. He slept under trees, which was uncomfortable at first, but became tolerable. He wore the same robe day after day, which was undignified at first but became irrelevant. And something strange began to happen. The further he got from his palace, the lighter he felt, as if he'd been carrying invisible weights that were falling away one by one. The weight of responsibility, the weight of reputation, the weight of protecting what he owned, the weight of being someone important. After several weeks, he found a monastery deep in the forest. It was small, just a cluster of simple buildings around a meditation hall. The abbot was an old monk with kind eyes who asked no questions about who this newcomer was or had been. He simply showed him where to sleep, what work needed doing, and when meditation began, the former king became a monk. He learned to sit still for hours, watching his breath, observing his mind. He learned to sweep floors, to fetch water, to prepare simple meals of rice and vegetables. He learned to own only his robe, his bowl, and his razor. Everything else was unnecessary. And gradually, slowly, like ice melting in spring, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in decades, something he'd almost forgotten existed. Not pleasure. Exactly. Not the sharp highs of acquisition or achievement, but a steady, underlying quality that he finally recognized as contentment. Contentment without conditions. Contentment not dependent on circumstances being perfect. Contentment that existed in the morning when his back hurt from sleeping on a mat, in the afternoon when the work was tedious, in the evening when the meal was plain. Just contentment, peace, a sense that this moment, exactly as it was enough. He practiced meditation intensely, following the Buddha's teachings with the same dedication he'd once applied to ruling a kingdom. He watched his mind, watched desire arise and pass, watched aversion arise and pass, watched all the patterns that had controlled him without his knowing. And slowly, those patterns loosened their grip. 6 months after leaving his palace, he achieved what the Buddha called the first stage of awakening. It happened during meditation. Nothing dramatic, just a sudden, clear seeing that the self he'd spent his life building and protecting was a construction, not a solid thing. Just ideas and memories and habits, all of it changing, none of it permanent. In that seeing, Something released. Fear released. Grasping released. The endless cycle of wanting and worrying just stopped. After that, he was different, lighter, freer, and often, sitting in meditation or walking through the forest or eating his simple meal, he would find himself saying aloud, "What happiness! Oh, what happiness!" His fellow monks thought it was odd at first. Here was a brother who joined them only recently, who worked as hard as anyone, who owned nothing, who slept on the floor, and he kept exclaiming about happiness as if he'd discovered treasure. But it was treasure. He had discovered treasure, the kind that couldn't be stolen, couldn't be lost, couldn't be diminished. Not the happiness of getting what you want, but the happiness of not needing anything to be different than it already was. After a year in the forest, he decided to visit his old meditation teacher back in the city. The teacher had become the chief monk at a large monastery, respected and honored, with students of his own. The former king, now just another monk, traveled there and sat at his teacher's feet, as students do. They didn't talk much, but every so often, the visiting monk would look around at the monastery, at his teacher, at the other students, and say with genuine wonder, "What happiness! Oh, what happiness!" One day, the king, the current king, his son came to visit the chief monk. It was a state visit, formal and ceremonial. Guards accompanied him. Ministers attended. Protocol was observed. The king paid his respects to the chief monk. But the visiting monk from the forest, absorbed in his own contentment, kept murmuring, "What happiness! What happiness!" He didn't even look up when the king entered. Didn't bow. Didn't acknowledge the royal presence in any way. The king was offended. Here he was, taking time from running a kingdom to visit this monastery. And this monk couldn't even be bothered to show basic respect. He was disturbed, angry even, though he tried not to show it. After the visit, the chief monk noticed the king's mood and smiled. "Your Majesty, may I tell you something about that monk who seemed to ignore you?" "Please do," the king said stiffly. "That monk was once a king himself, as rich and mighty as you. He had a palace, armies, wealth beyond measure. Everything a man could want." The current king's eyes widened. Then he gave it all up. Everything. Walked away to live in a forest, to practice the Buddha's teachings. And now, the chief monk paused, choosing his words carefully. Now he sits with nothing. No guards to protect him. No wealth to worry about. No reputation to maintain. Just a robe, a bowl, and complete freedom from fear and grasping. The chief monk continued. When he was a king, he was surrounded by armed men because he needed protection from enemies, from rivals, from anyone who might want what he had. Now he sits alone in forests with nothing to protect and no one to fear. When he was king, he worried constantly about losing his wealth and power. Now he has nothing to lose, and that freedom is more valuable than any treasure. He says, "What happiness?" because he's discovered something most people never find, that true happiness doesn't come from having more. It comes from needing less, from being so completely content with what is that nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be taken away. The happiness he feels now, Your Majesty, is not dependent on anything external. No one can take it from him. It can't be stolen or lost or diminished. It's his, absolutely and completely, because it comes from within. The chief monk looked at the king with gentle eyes. "He wasn't ignoring you, Your Majesty. He was simply too absorbed in his own happiness to notice the arrival of things that no longer matter to him: titles, position, ceremony. To him, you are a fellow human being, no more and no less. And that is the highest respect of all. The current king sat in silence for a long time. Then he asked quietly, Is he happier now than when he was king? Ask him yourself, the chief monk suggested. So the king did. He found the visiting monk sitting under a tree and sat down beside him, not as a king to a subject, but as one seeker to another. Were you really a king once? He asked. The monk smiled. I ruled a kingdom. I had wealth and power. I was called a king. Yes. And are you happier now, living like this, with nothing? The monk was quiet for a moment. Then he said, When I was king, I was surrounded by beauty and comfort, but I was never at ease. Every pleasure was shadowed by the fear of losing it. Every possession required protection. Every decision carried the weight of consequences. I had everything and it was never enough. Now I have almost nothing. I sleep on the ground. I eat plain food. I own one robe. And I am happier than I ever imagined possible. Because I'm not afraid anymore. Not afraid of losing things. Not afraid of death. Not afraid of what others think. That fear, that constant anxiety, it was like carrying a mountain on my back. And I didn't even know it was there until I set it down. He looked at the king, really looked at him, seeing past the royal robes and the title to the worried man beneath. You have everything I used to have, and you're not happy either, are you? The king couldn't lie. Not here. Not to this man who'd walked the same path. No, he admitted. I'm not. Then you know, the monk said gently. You already know that the answer isn't in having more. It's in letting go. In finding the happiness that doesn't depend on circumstances being perfect. In discovering that peace isn't something you achieve, it's something you uncover when you stop covering it up with grasping and aversion and fear. The king stayed at the monastery for 3 days. He sat in meditation with the monks. He ate simple meals. He talked with the former king about the burden of ruling, about the loneliness of power, about the fear that underlies so much of what we call success. When he left, he was different. Not ready to give up his throne that would come years later, in his own time, but different inside, quieter, more aware of the weight he was carrying, more open to the possibility that happiness might not be where he'd been looking for it. The monk from the forest stayed at the monastery for another week, then returned to his simple life among the trees. He lived many more years, practicing meditation, helping other monks, occasionally teaching visitors who found their way to his forest hermitage. And always, throughout those years, he would periodically stop whatever he was doing, sitting in meditation, sweeping the path, eating his meal, and say with genuine amazement, "What happiness, oh, what happiness?" Other monks asked him once, "What makes you so happy? You have less than anyone here." He smiled. "I have everything I need. This breath, this body that still functions, this moment, right now, exactly as it is. The Dharma to guide me, the peace of knowing I don't need anything to be different. How could I not be happy? I spent decades accumulating things that never satisfied. Now I have nothing and I'm satisfied completely. That's not losing everything, that's finding everything." When he died, years later, his last words were, "What happiness?" Not because he was happy to die, but because even death, even that final letting go, was just another moment. just another part of the flow. Nothing to grasp, nothing to resist. Just one more piece of the great mystery. And he met it the way he'd learned to meet everything, with contentment, with peace, with the recognition that this too was exactly as it needed to be. The story spread across India. People told it to each other, the king who gave up everything and found happiness in nothing. Monks used it in their teachings. Parents told it to children. It became one of those stories that carries truth in its bones. And maybe you feel it now, lying here in the dark. That same question the former king asked, have you been looking for happiness in having more, in achieving more, in becoming more? And has it worked? Has any amount of success or acquisition or accomplishment created lasting peace? Or is there something else, something the monk discovered? That happiness isn't something you chase and catch. It's something you uncover by removing all the things you thought you needed, by letting go of the endless grasping, by finding contentment with what is, rather than constantly reaching for what isn't. You don't have to give up everything. You don't have to walk into a forest. But you can learn what the monk learned, that peace is available now, in this breath, in this moment, not in some future when conditions are perfect, but right here, exactly as things are. Feel your breath. Simple, ordinary breath. Nothing special about it. But if you're breathing, you have what you need right now. Feel the surface beneath you, holding you. If you're held, you're safe right now. Notice the darkness, the quiet, the way this moment is perfectly itself without needing your approval or improvement. What if that's enough? What if it's always been enough, and you've just been too busy chasing other things to notice? The monk who was once a king discovered that all his grasping had been covering up a happiness that was always there, always available, just waiting to be recognized. Not dramatic happiness, not peak experiences or achievements, just steady, reliable contentment with what is. You can find that too, not by adding more to your life, but by releasing your grip on what you think you need. Not by achieving something extraordinary, but by recognizing that this ordinary moment, this breath, this heartbeat, this consciousness that knows it's conscious is already extraordinary. Rest in that. Let go of the need for anything to be different. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself thinking what the monk thought. What happiness? Oh, what happiness. Not because everything is perfect, but because nothing needs to be. Sleep now in that contentment. Rest in the recognition that you already have everything required for peace. And if you wake in the night with worry or fear or grasping, remember the monk who gave up a kingdom and found treasure. Remember that happiness isn't elsewhere. It's here. It's now. It's always been here. Always been now. Just waiting for you to stop looking elsewhere long enough to see it. Breathe. Be. Rest. What happiness. And as that forest monastery fades into dreams, as the image of a former king sitting contentedly beneath trees dissolves into sleep, we turn now to one final teaching about joy, a teaching that will guide us gently toward the end of this long night, toward rest that holds both wisdom and release. There was once a monk who lived in a small temple at the edge of a village. His name doesn't matter. The village doesn't matter. Even when this happened, doesn't really matter. What matters is what he learned, which was almost nothing, which was everything. Every morning, he woke before dawn. The temple was quiet. Outside, the world was still dark. That soft darkness before the sun remembers it's supposed to rise. He would sit on his cushion in the meditation hall and just breathe. In, out, in, out. Nothing special. Just breath happening the way breath does. After meditation, he would walk to the well and draw water. The rope was rough against his palms. He could feel every fiber. The bucket descended into darkness and came up heavy, dripping. He would pour the water into a basin and wash his face. The water was cold. It made him gasp slightly. His skin felt awake. Then he would sweep the temple grounds. Fallen leaves collected there overnight, oak leaves in autumn, cherry blossoms in spring, pine needles always. The broom made a soft swishing sound against stone. Swish, swish. Just that sound and the movement of his arms and the gradual clearing of the path. After sweeping, he would prepare a simple breakfast. Rice, sometimes pickled vegetables, tea. He would sit and eat slowly, tasting each bite. The rice was slightly sticky. The tea was bitter and warm. His stomach, empty since yesterday evening, gradually filled. This was his life. Every day the same, more or less. Wake, sit, wash, sweep, eat. Then there were afternoon tasks: tending the small garden, mending his robe when it tore, occasionally meeting with villagers who came seeking advice or blessing. Evening meditation, evening meal, sleep. One day, a traveler came to the temple. He was young, maybe 25, with searching eyes and questions that tumbled out of him like water from an overfilled cup. He had visited many teachers, studied many texts, practiced many techniques. He was looking for enlightenment. Master, he said, though the monk wasn't really a master. Just someone who'd been a monk for a long time. Master, how do I find peace? The monk was sitting on the temple steps, enjoying the afternoon sun. It was warm on his face. A bee was buzzing somewhere in the garden. He could hear it, but couldn't see it. Have you eaten? The monk asked. Yes, in the village. But master, please, I need to know, how do I still my mind? How do I stop all this thinking? This constant noise? Wash your bowl, the monk said. The traveler stared at him. What? Your bowl? From your meal. Go wash it. The traveler opened his mouth to protest, to explain that he wasn't asking about practical matters, that he needed spiritual guidance. But something in the monk's expression stopped him. So he went to wash his bowl. When he came back, the monk was still sitting on the steps, still enjoying the sun. The bee was still buzzing. Master, I washed the bowl. Now will you teach me? Did you wash it? Yes. Did you feel the water? The traveler paused. Yes. It was warm. And the bowl? Did you feel its curve, its weight? I suppose so. Yes. Then I already taught you. The traveler sat down on the steps, frustrated but also curious. I don't understand. The monk was quiet for a while. The bee's buzzing got louder, then softer, then louder again as it moved through its bee work in the flowers. Every morning, the monk finally said, I wake up. I sit and breathe. I wash my face with cold water. I sweep leaves. I eat rice. Every day, the same. He paused. And every day, it's different. Because every day is this day. Not yesterday. Not tomorrow. Just this day. This morning's water. This afternoon's sun. This moment's be. But what about enlightenment? The traveler asked. What about liberation? What about the great insights the masters talk about? The monk smiled. Have you eaten? You already asked me that. Did you taste your food? The traveler thought. Honestly, not really. I was thinking about my questions, about what I would ask you. Then you missed your meal. You ate it, but you missed it. Something in the traveler's chest tightened. He realized this was true. He'd eaten dozens of meals in the last few weeks of traveling, and he couldn't remember tasting any of them. He'd been too busy thinking about the next thing, the next teacher, the next technique. Stay for a few days, the monk said. Not to learn anything, just to stay. So the traveler stayed. The monk didn't teach him meditation techniques or give him koans to solve or explain profound philosophy. They just lived. They woke, washed, swept, ate, worked, rested, ate again. It slept. The monk showed him how to hold the broom to sweep more easily, how to judge the rice by its texture to know when it was done, how to mend cloth with small, even stitches. On the third day, while drawing water from the well, the traveler noticed the rope. Really noticed it. The roughness against his palms, the way each fiber was distinct, the weight of the bucket pulling down, then the splash when it hit water far below, the coolness of the water when he brought it up, the way light caught in the drops that fell from the bucket's rim. He stood there holding the bucket, just looking at water dripping. And suddenly, he laughed. Nothing was funny. He just laughed. The monk, who was sitting nearby repairing a sandal, looked up and smiled. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. That evening, they ate dinner in silence. Rice, pickled radish, tea. The traveler tasted his food for the first time in weeks. The rice was slightly sweet. The radish was salty and crunchy. The tea was bitter and perfect. His mouth was full of taste. His stomach was filling. And he was present for all of it. After dinner, they sat on the temple steps watching darkness arrive. It didn't come all at once. It came gradually, like something pouring slowly into the world. First, the sky turned deep blue. Then the stars appeared, one by one. Then dozens. Then hundreds. The air cooled. Somewhere a frog began its evening song. I think I understand now, the traveler said quietly. It's not about achieving something. It's about being present for what's already here. The monk nodded. Yes. And also, you're still thinking too much about it. Trying to understand. Trying to grasp it. Just sit. Just watch stars appear. That's all. They sat. The traveler tried to just sit. But his mind kept making commentary. I'm sitting. I'm watching stars. This is peaceful. Is this enlightenment? Am I doing it right? Your mind is noisy, the monk observed. Not critically, just noticing. I know. I can't make it stop. Don't try to make it stop. Just notice the noise. Like noticing the frog singing. It's just sound happening. Your thoughts are just thoughts happening. You don't have to believe them or fight them. Just let them be there while you're here watching stars. The traveler tried this. Thoughts came. He noticed them. They went. More thoughts came. He noticed those too. And somehow, in the noticing, without grasping or pushing away. The thoughts became less solid, less real, just movements in awareness, like clouds moving across the sky. A star fell, a bright line across the darkness, there and gone in a breath. "Did you see that?" the traveler whispered. Yes. They sat in comfortable silence. More stars fell. The frog kept singing. The night air smelled like earth and growing things. And everything was just this. Just sitting. Just breathing. Just being alive in this moment, which was the only moment that ever existed. The traveler stayed for 2 weeks. And gradually, his urgency faded. His need to achieve enlightenment, to have some great realization, to become someone different, it all softened like clay softening in water. He began to notice small things. The way morning light hit the temple wall. The sound rain made on the roof different from how it sounded on leaves. The taste of water from the well. How his feet felt on cool stone. One morning, he was sweeping the path and realized he'd forgotten to think about enlightenment. He'd just been sweeping, feeling the broom, seeing the leaves, being there. And this forgetting felt more like remembering, like coming home to something he'd left years ago. That afternoon, he prepared to leave. He thanked the monk, bowed deeply. "Will you continue your journey?" the monk asked. "Looking for teachers?" The traveler smiled. "I think I already found what I was looking for. Or rather, I stopped looking and found I was already here." "Good," the monk said. "Don't forget though, it's not a permanent achievement. You'll forget again. Get caught up in thinking again. That's fine. Just notice when it happens. Come back to this. Whatever this moment is, just this," the traveler said. "Just this." After the traveler left, the monk continued his life. Wake, wash, sweep, eat. The same. Different. Each day its own day. Each moment its own moment. Sometimes villagers came asking questions. Sometimes he traveled to nearby villages to offer blessings. Sometimes he did nothing but sit and watch clouds change shape. None of it was more important than anything else. All of it was just life happening. Just consciousness being conscious. Just this ordinary miracle of existing. Years passed. The monk got older. His joints stiffened. His back hurt some mornings. He moved more slowly. But the cold water on his face was still cold. The broom still made its swishing sound. The rice still tasted like rice. Morning still came. Night still came. Everything still just kept being what it was. One winter day, he felt death approaching. Not dramatically. Just a sense that his body was getting ready to stop. Like a machine winding down, running out of whatever force had been running it. He wasn't afraid. Death was just another moment. Just another thing happening. He had no great final words. No profound teachings to pass on. He just lay down on his mat, watched the ceiling, felt his breath getting shallower. A young monk who had been studying with him sat nearby. "Master, is there anything you want to say? Any final teaching?" The old monk smiled slightly. He lifted one hand, it took effort, and gestured toward the window. Outside, snow was falling. Big, soft flakes drifting down from a gray sky. Landing on the temple roof. On the stone path. On the bare branches of trees. "Just this," he whispered. And then his breath stopped. Just stopped. like it had been doing 10,000 times a day for 70 years, except this time it didn't start again. The young monk sat with the body for a while, watching snow fall, and he understood something without words, that his teacher's whole life had been one long lesson about just this. Whatever this was, in any moment, the snow, the breath, the cold, the warmth, the living, the dying, all of it just what it was. None of it needing to be more or less or different. Just this. Now feel your own breath. In, out. Just this breath. This simple, ordinary breath that's been happening your whole life without you needing to think about it. Feel the surface beneath you. Just this surface. Holding you. Supporting you. Always there. Feel the darkness. Not scary darkness. Just the absence of light. Just the gentle dark that lets you rest. This moment. This breath. This darkness. This rest. Just this. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be understood. Nothing needs to be achieved. You're breathing. That's enough. You're here. That's enough. This moment is happening. That's enough. The cold water on your face, the sound of sweeping, the taste of rice, the stars appearing, the snow falling, your breath moving. All of it just this. Just exactly what it is. Just enough. Feel your eyelids getting heavy. Your body getting heavier. Sinking into rest. Letting go of the need to understand or achieve or become. Just being here. Just breathing. Just drifting into sleep the way snow drifts down from sky. Just this breath. Just this softness. Just this letting go. Just this rest. Just this. Just this. Just this. Nothing more needed. Nothing less possible. Just exactly this. Just exactly now. Just exactly enough. Sleep now. Rest now. Let go now. Just this. Just this. Just this.